Where's Jolene when you need her? I need to tell her this story.
About what?
Losing something and looking all over for it, and then
Oh.
all of a sudden it's right in front of you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get started. Good evening. Welcome to this workshop of the Hopkins School Board. We have 2 agenda items for our workshop, and then our regular meeting will follow. Our first agenda item is our grades 6 and 9 transition update. We know that this team has been really hard at work all year, and I will turn it over to Dr. Mary Peary-Reed and invite Assistant Superintendent Lightfoot and Director Ertles to the table.
Thank you, Chair Westmoreland, and good evening to everyone here in the boardroom and also in the virtual space. So, yes, as Madam Chair mentioned, we have been very hard at work for really more than a year now to prepare for our 6th graders to transition to West and North middle schools, and for our 9th graders to transition to the high school. And this work is multifaceted, has involved lots and lots of people at the school and district level, and we're very grateful for Dr. Lightfoot and Director Ertles' leadership in this, and also for our teacher leaders. We have 6th and 9th grade transition teams that have had many components of the work led by our very own teachers, and we've spent time on PD days focused on the elements of the transition. So we're feeling well prepared, and I think part of that preparedness includes updating our school board and our community members. So I'll turn it over to Ann and Nick for the update, and then we'll hopefully have time for questions at the end.
And we've set it up here just to kind of put some talking points here, give some updates, some information. We've structured it with the lead-in that Dr. Mary Peary-Reed presented, really about where we've been, where we are now, and where we'll be at the start of the next school year, to kind of give a little bit of a pathway perspective along the way. To begin with, shout out to great partners. In fact, we just finished from 4:30 until 5 o'clock, our transition steering committee. We were fortunate, I'm trying to think, and did we put that together back January of 22?
At least, yeah.
So in January of 22 was when we started pulling steering committee members together, and you think about that, and a year and a half later, we're right at it. And in the middle of it all, and we've had wonderful, dedicated individuals that have continually been showing up really about every other week to make sure that we've planned for the logistics, planned for the transition, and done the work that we can to really advance the programming with it. We were also fortunate, as we've been working with our design structures, to look at our educator leadership, and we have had building facilitators at Hopkins High School, West Middle School, hard to be saying that now, but West Middle School and North Middle School. And just want to make sure that we draw attention to Andrea Yesnes at North, Katie Stennis assisting with West, both of them looking at the middle level and facilitating the work that had been integral into starting and pulling all of this together. At the high school, we have been also working with facilitation with Rick Rexroth, Jeremy Reichel, and with Brent Eckhoff to facilitate that from our teacher leadership perspective. And it was important in the design that we have that voice throughout the process. And I'm trying to think, Ann, anybody that I missed there with those 5? But those really have been kind of the 5.
Been the key players, yep.
And we've
consistent.
Been consistent with them and trying to pull all of that information together. As we've been pulling that information together, we've been working with various committees along the way. We've been keeping staff updated. We had staff updates at the start of last school year. We've been working on the staffing committee to make sure that we had the transition of staff members, 6th grade staff moving to 9th grade staff moving to the high school, We've done that initial round of placements and have completed that initial work, so we now have a better sense of who will be in which space now that we hit April and May and can plan into the summer professional development opportunities. We've been looking at transition of humans committee, looking at how we take good care of people along the way, information that we can share, community engagement, student engagement, and we have had multiple touch points with the community. Last summer, they had opportunities to draw in 5th and 6th graders to gather the information about how would this possibly look for you, and what information and guidance would you give us as we work to create this. We've had voice from, I'm trying to think, how many committee members have we had overall with staff participation?
I think, well, at least at the middle level, I think there were upwards of around 100, and then at the high school level, I want to say at least a few dozen, yeah.
And we've had even day-long meetings at the high school. We have facilitated committees along the way as we've looked at the programming aspects. So we really have had quite the participatory experience in pulling all of this together. Each site has also had its committee teams with its building instructional leadership planning, as sites have implemented the key conceptual items that we wanted to keep and make sure that we had opportunities for sites to personalize. And then we also were involved with curricular and programming teams that have done some specific work in some of those aspects. Do we want to talk a little bit about some maybe of the 6th grade that might look a little bit different?
Yeah, so some of the exciting programming things that we are looking at the 6th grade level is, many of you have probably heard of Destination Imagination. So we are looking at including Destination Imagination as an experience for all 6th graders at both of our middle schools. So we're super excited about that. At the 9th grade level, one of the kind of neat things about taking sort of the course content that's been developed at North and the course content that has been developed at West is very early on, because our Hopkins learning framework calls for concept-based inquiry as our instructional model. Those IB units that have already been developed will be transitioning to the 9th grade level. And so those teachers are having an opportunity then to collaborate and really kind of take those units and refresh and build. This summer, we'll be doing just a ton of curriculum work to revise units and get ready for the launch of the 9th grade units. But at the high school, which will have, of course, a mix of teachers from both North and West, and the high school as well. So lots of exciting curriculum work happening as well.
And so that's kind of a transition of where we are as we think about April. And where we sit right now is in the implementation. With all of that planning background, we, as I said earlier, are engaged in the staffing transitions. As we look at that staffing transition, we know that individuals will be moving locations. We did our diligence in seeking two survey opportunities for individuals to express interest in moving to a new location. So we facilitated that information from all of our staff on multiple occasions to gather that information, and we're looking at how we could accommodate as many of those requests as we were able to through our staffing process, so that we were able to engage individuals that truly were, once they looked at the programming and the opportunities, invested in what that would look like within the transition. We've also been working with the facility revision for classroom spaces. One of those in particular, you'll be aware that the changes that are happening at the high school with the Certified Nursing Assistant program and with that CNA program, part of the opportunity is to look at the redesign of the space that is available for that programming so that we can have bays available for students to practice in opportunities that will then lead them to their requirements being met so that they can take the CNA licensure, for lack of a better term, test, so that they can be certified as CNA individuals, and then have the opportunity to, and I just, it's in the back of my head, I was following something from the legislative aspect, and the idea now moving forward that they are looking to grant 2 possible elective credits for opportunities for individuals that, like in a CNA program, now when they're, actually doing that work, they have the opportunity to get elective credits, and those elective credits would count toward graduation requirements, and they could use their work experience in CNA programs or other technical education programs, so that there's an additional opportunity for our young people who have that license and are actually working to get experience for that work experience as part of their graduation requirements as well. So some possible opportunities on the horizon there. In addition, there are construction projects that we were just talking with Kevin about in a little bit at North and at West, some space utilization components so that we did some walkthroughs with them and have some ideas of what that would look like as phase 1, with the idea that if we were into the future, as we've been working with our partners at Fielding International, looking into the future, if that might be an expansion opportunity or what that would look like with space utilization. So that was part of our work and our implementation. Also, as we have more students moving into the high school, we will need some additional revision of our special education programming areas to make sure that we have facilities and opportunities located within the high school to accommodate larger populations. That work is underway and on schedule as well. The other aspects that we are finalizing and working on are start and end times. That, of course, working with our transportation department and confirming now with Naisha on the specifics as it relates to where we are with the routes and the confirmed start and end times. All of that to be contained and put out on the information hub that our communication department has been working with our middle level and soon to be high school level to make sure that we have all of that information available for the community on our website. As well with community education before and after school programming for middle level students. This is a new addition and we're excited with that launch. Information was put out last Thursday, as recent as last Thursday, letting families know of the opportunity. Looking to start registration for that program May 1st. So that aspect is underway. And then we spoke a little bit about some of the curriculum transitions. And anything else to add there?
Actually, I will highlight the Junto 6 because that is kind of an exciting sort of reimagination of how we have approached Spanish immersion specifically. So you all know that we have been a feeder for ISLA in the past and certainly have been really proud of our partnership with ISLA. And what our past practice had been was we would assess our own native Spanish-speaking students who had not been at ISLA but were matriculating to North Junior High to see if they could participate in Juntos at North. This was prior to us having our own Juntos program. And of course, our own Juntos students are only second graders at this point anyway. So as we've thought about this transition, our North Junior High Juntos teachers were really concerned because there were many of our own Hopkins Spanish-speaking students who weren't demonstrating the literacy skills in Spanish to be able to participate at the same level as the students who are coming from ISLA. And so through their hard work with Rushi on my team and with Paris on my team in some summer programming opportunities, they've really redesigned what the supports and criteria can look like to participate in Junto 6 so that it is a more inclusive program, and we will be able to have any native Spanish speaker who wants to participate in Junto 6 can participate. So there's no barrier to participation, and we're looking at providing all of the literacy supports that are needed for them to be successful in that program. And it's really a pretty significant programming change that we're really happy about. It's really a pretty powerful and significant equity move. And I think, because Juntos does mean together, I think it's something that we haven't probably talked about and highlighted enough, but it's a really exciting thing for our district, and a lot of people have been working really hard on it, and it is truly, truly driven and born out of the desire of our North Junior High, North Middle School Juntos teachers. They just really believe so strongly in making that program available to all of our students. So we're super excited about that. And then I guess I can also mention the boring stuff about the supplies and item transfer. People are boxing things up. We're making sure that all of the things that need to go to all of the different places we're getting organized around, which microscopes need to stay, which ones need to go, and all of those kinds of odds and ends too, so that we make sure that on day one, all of our labs, and it does tend to be science that is materials heavy, but not just science, but we want to make sure that all of the things that our teachers need are in the right spaces, so we're planning for that now too. It's down to, I never thought we would be in this space when we started in, what did you say, January of 2022, but here we are. We really are at the boxing up stage, so we're working on that as well.
We also did go through the process with course development, new course development and program registration. So we finalized that work with the course registrations and new courses and all of that information. And just a shout out to all the work that our office staff, building administrators, data specialists, instructors as well, all of the involved efforts in getting us to this point where we're working on the schedules, we're working on the room placements, we're working on all the questions even down to the level, and we answered this in November. Will everybody fit? Yes, with room to spare, and here are some of the specific plans. But a lot of that is also determined on what courses would be offered, where they would be offered, how we'd be offering the programming, and so that work is continually evolving for us as we get additional information and move into the summer work that's associated with that also. Anything else on where we are? Anything? Okay. Where we will be. Here's kind of where we're finalizing and developing. Some of these things are the details. Some of them are the broader experiences. Student orientation experiences for the opening. We were just talking about this about a half an hour ago. Looking at what those opening weeks look like, what the launches look like for the orientation into the space as we think about our 9th and 10th graders, as we think about as well our now 5th and 6th graders, soon to be 6th and 7th graders, what that looks like for the opening, more information to come as our buildings finalize those plans and those planning processes. That work is underway and should be finished within the next couple weeks. Even down to aspects of lunch schedules and looking at 3 lunch periods, 4 lunch periods, working with school nutrition, working with our buildings and ground staff to make sure that we have adequate staff coverage, that we have space available. Looking now then, do we need to have additional individuals for our serving lines to make sure that we can accommodate those spaces? So a lot of that detailed work is evolving, especially as we look at the high school, collaborating with high school staff to finalize and develop that daily schedule within the high school, particularly focused around those operations and those operational needs. We're also looking at the activities and athletics, the specific program opportunities when those occur, what that looks like for our after-school programming, as well as clubs, as well as other experiences as we look at ninth grade at the high school, and as we look, as I mentioned before, about the before and after school programming that's part of our community education opportunities that families will have the opportunity to register for as well. The launching of the information hubs I mentioned, staff development for summer and workshop week. We're also looking at that related to IB coursework development units, new course aspects there. I'm trying to think of anything else for staff development that we're focused on beyond those two aspects this summer.
I think one of the things that has been really important to our, to the teacher teams who have been thinking about the transition is how to build intentional new community around sort of the shifting of the teaching teams that would be moving to buildings. And so I know that our administration teams, as well as the leadership teams, are also starting to think about and making some pretty specific plans around that idea of how to start building community among staff in preparation for replicating or building community around new students arriving as well.
And then lastly, the recruiting of staff. We know in some of our hard-to-fill areas, we're hard at work looking now for licensed individuals and going near and far and everywhere in between to look at making sure that we're staffed and ready to roll for the beginning of next school year. And any other items, Ann, that you can think of? We tried to capture just the general sense of it and give you a little bit of the kind of the scope of where we've been, where we are right now, and can't emphasize enough that this takes an entire system to do. And the engagement of our community, the engagement of our staff in this process has just reinforced that people are committed to do the right work for the right reasons. And that has been, I would say, a hallmark of the experience and the engagement that when we have asked staff, even as opportunities developed in January and February, staff to give time in the evenings to meet and greet the community of people coming into the space. We had more than enough staff volunteer, and we opened every door to say, welcome, please come in, and we appreciate the time that you're willing to give. So those opportunities across the board have been really, I would say, hallmarks of the experience, and we look to continue that as we get ready to head into the summer, but launch our programs in August and September. So with that, anything I missed? Thank you. All right, questions?
Thank you so much. This is really exciting, and I rarely do this at this table, but I'm going to speak from my perspective as a parent of a rising seventh grader who will be going to West next year, that just the whole process around welcoming in students and families has been really inclusive and warm. And when you were talking about staff, signing up to be part of those welcome nights, and then I know there was a family and caregiver welcome night last week. Unfortunately, I was out of town, so I couldn't go to that, but I heard great things about it. There's just this culture building that's already happening there. And it's a really exciting feeling. And so now to be able to kind of flesh that out with more specific information about what's been happening behind the scenes is, I think, really helpful for our community. Certainly those of us who are like part of the transition, our families are part of the transition. I had a question about staff development. So you mentioned, this intentionality around human transition into these new spaces and configurations, which is so wonderful. And I know that both of our middle schools, formerly junior highs, have worked so hard at creating their own unique school culture with so many wonderful facets to that. And I'm kind of wondering how that's going to go with staff development, so that new staff coming into those spaces, what is that going to look like in terms of kind of culture building and bringing these two groups of staff essentially together?
So I know Dr. Camphy is sitting in the back. I'm sure that she probably has some thoughts and ideas and thinking around what they're planning for at West. So I can't speak to like specific plans or ideas, but I know that, very early on, the language that our teams were using was really around reculturing the staff, which was really powerful and really generated by the staff themselves. So it wasn't about sort of staff induction or we're going to teach them what it means to be Westies or whatever, but they really talked about how do we reculture to build a new community of staff and students at the same time, and had some pretty broad ideas around what that might look like, and I think have been sort of thinking about and planning for what that could look like with the end goal in mind of creating inclusive staff communities, because they know that obviously a cohesive and coherent staff community is the foundation for a cohesive and coherent student community as well. So, and I know that the calendar also is allowing for 2 extra days that are dedicated staff time for the transition. And so the teams are hard at work planning intentionally around what those days can look like to do some of that work with intentionality to prepare for or maybe even welcome students into the buildings on those days.
It's a great approach.
Chair Westmoreland.
Yes.
Could either of you describe these information hubs? What are they? How do they work?
Sure. Give me 2 seconds, and I think they're live. So let me escape here while we're doing that and go right ahead. I'll try to see if I can
While he's
pull
pulling
it.
that up, we can give a shout out to our fabulous Marcom team who has worked really, really hard with our school leaders to get those up and running. I know Jolene was working with our high school team this afternoon and our junior high teams earlier
Okay.
to get those up and rolling too, but we can take a look and see what that looks like.
Make sure I pull it up here. So on our webpage, we have the transition hubs, and I know I'll put Dr. Camphy on the spot. They've been working on West Middle School's hub, and we've been making sure that we have information here in the transportation hub. We have the important dates, the step-up days, back-to-school experiences, what I need, daily schedules, so that people can see those, lockers, school supplies, first week's information, general information that's here, so folks can access this information, fill out transportation, sets their athletic activities, just some of the general information, like I mentioned, even the before and after school care, building hours, security, Canvas, Infinite Campus, communication, and then team teaching. This might be kind of one of the pieces. Dr. Camphy, can I call you up real quick? I like this because this was one of the things that we were really trying to see if we could get some information to the community about, because it's an aspect of the work that came forward about 6th grade and looking at the teaming aspect. And part of what we wanted to be able to do on the hub, and I'll let Dr. Campy speak more to that about what's here, is kind of let the community know about some of the innovative work that's being done there with the sixth grade.
So we are looking at West at a team teaching model for sixth grade for next year, and then we'll implement it the following year for seventh grade, year after that for eighth grade. What that's going to look like is a team of teachers, 4 of the 8 IB subjects that are collaborating together and very flexible in how they're delivering curriculum to students. So the students in the morning will have those 4 subjects. In the afternoon, they'll go to their other 4 subjects, and that'll be more of a traditional block schedule in the afternoon. But in the morning, those teachers have the option to decide on a daily or a weekly basis how much time they need for their subject based upon what they're seeing from the students. So those teachers in the morning will be for science, math, language and literature, and design. In the afternoon, those teachers will then have some common planning time, but then they'll also push into classes. So they'll also be watching the sixth grade students to see where there might be clusters of students that need extra support of some kind. So they might push into the Spanish class or to the band class because they know that there are some students who are needing some extra support in those areas.
And so we tried to contain, thank you. Sorry to put you on the spot.
That's okay.
It's a great way of saying, here's some of that additional information that we can put out to the community. We also talked about this as being a starting point and then getting some additional information as families have questions or additional resources that we can put into this space so that we can keep putting this in front of our families as a continual space that people can come to for the information. In a very micro sense about, okay, when does school start? In a macro sense of, okay, this is what team teaching looks like, and this is why it might be a little bit different than what you've experienced before, and here's what we're trying to accomplish with it. Did that answer your question?
Oh, yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
I think it should be there after we transition. It's got all the
Can do.
answers that a parent would want, I would think. So, thank you.
Chair Westmoreland?
Yes.
I was excited to hear you talk about the various community outreach efforts that have gone on, and one, possibly this is a comment and less of a question, but would encourage, after many conversations with parents and some with staff as well, to kind of keep that ball rolling. Like, I have personally experienced a big change in like the amount of fundraising dollars and the amount of hours that parents will put in at the elementary level, and seeing that not translate for a whole variety of valid reasons at the junior high level. And admittedly, I know less about West and about parent involvement and the PTO type of thing there, but I know from Meadowbrook, like, we are going to do something every single day of Teacher Appreciation Week for the teachers there. And then at North, I know some parents are going to come together and like scrape up a lunch for the teachers, which is nothing to scoff at, but I know that all of these parents that come together want to do things to support teachers. They want to be in buildings. If you put out a call to get people to box stuff, to clean classrooms, to move stuff, to stock teachers with K-cups for the entire year. If you put out a call to have extra parent bodies for the first few weeks, I am just so positive that you will get probably more people than you can actually take. And if what you want is some culture training, or if you want background check, or whatever it is, whatever the logistics are, it feels like the sooner the better to kind of get thinking about how you could harness some of those energies, some of those dollars. And I think that even if there were some like, well, we need this very specific shift, we need like a a low-key commitment from you. If you need to do a quick training, if you need to come do a tour of the building so that you can be helpful, so you can point someone holding their schedule looking upset. I think even then, even with a little bit of friction there, you will get people with energy and time and even funds to support the efforts.
Thank you. That's a helpful element when we think about that parent engagement and what that looks like as well, beyond just the information too. How do we also have that engagement with?
Yeah, it's good.
Other questions, information we can be helpful with? Thoughts or ideas?
Chair Westmoreland.
Yes.
I just have one question. Is there anything that's keeping you guys up at night regarding this whole
That you will
transition?
admit to.
I can tell by their faces that there's nothing, you know?
All eyes fall to me. I don't know if it's keeping me up at night, but I think just thinking about 2/3 of the students in the building being new and 2/3 of the families being new, along with new staff, is a lot to consider. I know that typically the older students kind of shepherd in the newer students in terms of helping them adjust to the space. And so with that ratio flipped of not having 2/3 to be helpers, but only 1/3 to be helpers, that's something that we've been thinking about and just wanting to be mindful of. And also wanting to, at the same time, consider how we ensure that those rising 6th and 7th graders feel like they are helping to create the culture at the same time as they are learning how to be middle schoolers. So we're excited for the step-up day that's coming on May 11th when they get to come and visit the building. And I know that we're planning at West to get some feedback from them about what IB learner profile traits we should be focusing on as we move into becoming a middle school. So that's one of the ways that we're thinking about how we can incorporate their voice into what we're doing.
I appreciate the question. I think for me, it's the what are we missing and what haven't we thought about yet that we really should be thinking about? So for me, it's the yes, we've been engaged with this since January of 2022, but are there other items that we should be thinking about that we haven't, or things that we've just missed? And we know through any process that will occur, but I don't know, sometimes you fool yourself into thinking that overthinking will help, but really what does help is trying to engage in voices like this, saying, okay, anything we've missed, other thoughts that you have, where's the parent engagement, those aspects, that kind of feedback is so helpful to be saying, have you thought about, did you think about, what's the plan for all of the above? I think that's for me, doesn't keep me up at night, but it's really one of the areas of focus of saying what might be we missing? What might we be missing?
I don't want to say mine.
This is a safe, very public space.
Is it? Oh gosh, it's sort of embarrassing. I don't want to sound like a cheapskate, but I don't want to buy a bunch of stuff and then find closets full of stuff later that we didn't know were there. So I am really conscious about inventory and being a really good steward. And so I feel like I secretly want to go and look in closets and make sure that all the things that need to go to the places are getting to the right places. And again, it's not quite keeping me up at night, but I just, as a teacher who was a little, maybe a little bit of a hoarder, I understand the compulsion to do that, but I just want to make sure that our teachers have the things that they need and that we don't have troves of
things sitting somewhere that aren't being used because I don't like being wasteful.
You know, given that we have a budget update, yeah, I knew,
Great
yes.
reflection for the
Torero,
board.
Steve.
Exactly. You said it in front of the right audience here, especially given that we have a budget update next. So excellent answer and transition.
I just had a quick question. I love the idea of the team teaching approach. I think it's really innovative and will be really supportive for our students. I am wondering though, given those students who currently may be benefiting from the matching schedule at the high school, how have we thought through what that might look like of if there are students who are taking a class that's ahead a year or two, are we thinking about how that's going to work in that mix?
I think that we're still going to need to look at the first part of the day, since the schedule will be changing. I would suspect that the first part of the day is going to be where we would want to place those classes. So typically, if a student is taking classes at the high school and they're a middle school student, we usually build their whole schedule around whatever is happening at that other space. So that gets placed first, and then the rest of the schedule falls into place from there.
Okay, great, thanks.
Great. Any other questions or comments for this fantastic team? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to our next workshop agenda item, which is an audit and budget update. So I just want to make sure the board and our community realizes that we had an audit update that was added in. And then we'll also have the audit update as well as a budget update and preliminary approval at the meeting, so that agenda also changed slightly. So I just wanted, which means that there's the addition of the audit update. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Mary Perry Reed and invite Director Chapanduka and Ms. Hoffman to the table.
Thank you, Chair Westmoreland, and good evening, Director Chapanduka, and hello there, Michelle. Thanks for being here. Michelle Hoffman is from Clifton Larson Allen and will be helping us understand where we are with the audit, our district-wide audit. And we have shared with the board before, just in terms of a little framing, that we have been meeting as a collaborative leadership team every Thursday morning for the entire year to engage in a thoughtful and strategic plan-aligned budgeting process. So we're grateful for Torero and his team, who do lots of crunching and strategizing to be prepared for those Thursday mornings, and the business services and even members of the HR team have also been heavily involved in helping to complete the audit. So we're excited to hear where we are with the work, and much appreciation to all of the professionals who've been involved to date.
Thank you, Dr. Mary Perry. Good evening, Chair Westmoreland, respective board members. I'm actually very excited today. This is the time we've been waiting for. I know it took us a while to get here in terms of the budget presentation, just due to a lot of factors which were outside of our control. But here we are, and I'm pleased to be with Ms. Michelle Hoffman, a principal at Clifton Larson, our auditing partners for quite a long time now. We'll be presenting first our preliminary audit results. We'll be coming back again at the next board meeting with the full audit report to the board, but at least wanted to bring some initial information, and then we'll finalize the final report for the next board meeting. And after that, we'll transition to the fiscal year 23 revised budget, as well as the fiscal year 24 preliminary budget. So it's an honor that all this information was able to be presented at the same time, since it's all interconnected. That being said, I will give the floor to Ms. Hoffman to take us through the audit results. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chiro. Good evening, Superintendent, Board Chair, board members. Happy to be back. As Chiro just mentioned, I am here to present some preliminary audit results, and hopefully we'll have kind of the massive reports for you in a few weeks on the next meeting. So just wanted to go over some, again, preliminary results, a few financial numbers in here. Feel free to certainly interrupt me if you do have any questions as I'm going as well. But just I'm gonna have to probably click ahead, I think, right? I don't know. So if you want to scroll, there you go. Go ahead a slide. Thank you, Chiro. Overall, our audit results for fiscal 22. And again, these aren't quite finalized, but I wouldn't anticipate much really will change. But just wanted to make sure to point that out. We are planning to issue a clean or unmodified opinion on the financial statements for your fiscal year ending June 30, 2022. With regard to Yellow Book compliance, and Yellow Book is really government accounting standards. That it's literally a Yellow Book. That's why we call it Yellow Book. But that's what that's referring to. There are some kind of various compliance regulations things in there. We are not including any items to report in that letter. And in addition to the audit, as you're well aware, we do kind of look at a few other things, more than just tying out all the numbers, preparing financial reports. One of them is the internal controls of your district. We want to make sure that there are all those checks and balances in place, reviews, reconciliations at year end, just kind of all those procedures. Anything from a day-to-day type of check or transaction to some of those bigger year-end items. We look at a lot of different areas. And if we had some areas maybe where some room for improvement, we would communicate them to you in this internal control letter. We do have one item we are going to be including, and it's just related to some material audit adjustments. When we were kind of working through some state and federal calculations, I know those get a little complicated. We did just have a couple adjustments to make to really get those to what we felt were the kind of final numbers. So just one item that we are including in that letter. Our federal single audit, and that is related to all your federal programs. Of course, since you spend more than $750,000 in federal funds every year, you're required to have a federal single audit or compliance audit. It's a risk-based audit. It's over, we usually, there's a kind of a way we have to look at your programs, but typically the larger and or riskier programs are the ones that get tested every year. So this year we are testing, again, the Education Stabilization Fund, which is your ESSER funds. I'm sure that's kind of been more familiar, that term to you, as it is deemed a risky program by the federal government just by its nature. It's a COVID-related program, as well as your Title I funds, another program that you have that, of course, that program's been on for a long time, not as new. But so we are testing both those federal programs. We are still finishing up a few of those last items, but as of now, we do not have anything we are including in our federal single audit letter. Last thing we look at is Minnesota legal compliance. There is a whole myriad of statutes that, of course, apply to school districts in Minnesota. And the Office of the State Auditor every year publishes a checklist, kind of a guideline for all of us auditors that we need to use. It's fairly detailed. There's kind of a lot of just little things here and there. Everything from paying your bills, every single invoice within 35 days to a lot of detailed requirements over procurement and all kinds of other things. So anytime we just have a deviation, we include that in the letter. So we do have two items we are including in our legal compliance letter. One is related to some kind of tricky situations involving procurement, a procurement that we tested. And the other one is just fine-tuning a couple of the UFARS coding. As you know, UFARS is the Uniform Financial Accounting Reporting standards that the state really has, that they have all these very detailed codes that you're supposed to use. And we just had a few reclasses with state aids, revenues, things like that, just a couple items that we reclassed. So we're just including a recommendation to just review a few of those coding items. All right, you can flip ahead. So I have a few slides here with just a little bit more operational results as far as numbers, starting out with enrollment. Here we have our ADM served, or average daily membership for the year, and we can kind of see a little bit of a trend here. And with the ADM report that we were showing actually about a little over 1% increase in average daily membership from fiscal 22 when we looked at fiscal 21. And of course, fiscal 21 had a decrease from the prior year, so kind of reversing that trend just a little bit. You can see ending at 6,934 ADM served. You can see, of course, the breakdown there between kindergarten and pre-kindergarten and elementary. Elementary, which, or I should say secondary is 7 through 12. Elementary, we're considering 1 through 6 here, just so you know. So you can see certainly a large increase there in the regular kindergarten number. Flip ahead. Next slide still has enrollment. I always think this is a bit of an interesting slide because it shows your not only the students you served in your district, but the students that live in your district and the ones that chose to attend school here versus open enroll out or open enroll in. So here we're showing the 6,934 again, as you can see, and you can kind of get a look at your open enrollment out. About 1,600 students, and then about another 500 are going to charter schools. So when you kind of add those together, of course, about 2,100 students. So overall, your net ADM served there of 6,900, as I mentioned, and then 7,500 is our weighted pupil units. All right. General fund, overall general fund operations for the year, and a little bit of a 5-year look back, a solid increase in fund balance for the general fund fiscal 22 of just under $2 million, so about 1.9 million. Revenues exceeding expenditures. You can see both revenues and expenditures increased a fair amount from the prior year. But fund balance overall ending at about 22 million for the year. Taking a look at general fund expenditures by object, and I know Turo just mentioned, of course, looking ahead at budget. So we have our budget actual as well here for fiscal 22, just in the general fund again, by object code. So you can see overall, as I mentioned, actual expenditures of 114.5 million. That was almost $2 million under budget for the year. With the biggest areas, of course, being, you can see there, salaries and benefits together, both were under budget, as well as purchase services being under budget by about 10%. Food service operations. Food service had a pretty strong year. This was the last year where districts were really able to operate that seamless program that was still kind of related to the tail end of the pandemic as far as not necessarily, collecting applications, free and reduced. So there were still some waivers there with offering the seamless program and having those meals be all federally reimbursed under that program. So that tended to boost revenue. So you end up with 4.5 million in revenue, $4.2 million in expenditures to have an increase of fund balance of 277,000, ending fund balance at just over 1.1 million for the year. We can flip ahead again. And this graph, this will show you again what I was just illustrating with our seamless program. Maybe lost it. That's okay. You can all see it in front of you. Of course, last year was the first year really we're operating that program, essentially offering free meals to all students who chose to utilize the program. And these are just lunches, I should clarify. Of course, you're serving breakfast as well. But fiscal 21 was really that first year where we were serving free meals to all students who chose to partake. That waiver continued to fiscal 22. And as you can see there was actually quite a large increase then. I'm sure some of it was due to not really, fiscal 21 had some remote days, things like that. Fiscal 22, we were still offering free meals, but more in person pretty much every day. So a nice increase there, total meals served, all those being offered for free in fiscal 22. So those waivers have essentially ended now. As you know, we're already kind of well into fiscal 23. So we will see that kind of dynamic start to shift again as we get into fiscal 23 as the meals being served. Lastly, our Community Service Fund. Community Service Fund also had very strong operations in fiscal 22 with a $1.8 million increase to fund balance. Revenues were kind of right back to where, fiscal 19, as they had gone down, of course, in fiscal 2021, kind of recovered and got right back to those levels of fiscal 19, while able to hold expenditures a little more steady there, a little lower, not have quite the increase. So a nice increase to the Community Service Fund. Those programs are certainly getting utilized. It appears the community is certainly liking what the district has to offer, and that fund has continued to perform well. With that, that is the end of my presentation. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you very much. Questions or comments from the board?
Chair Westmoreland.
Yes.
I'm just concerned about the two legal compliance issues. Well, actually, just the one related to contracting and bidding. Were we not bidding out some projects or some items that we should have been, or how was that? What were the details?
Do you want me to weigh in, or do you want to take it? I will say this was a complicated one, and we went back and forth on it a long time. It's related to some of the turf projects, and there were different pieces involved. There was a few different types of bids. And ultimately, the statutes are really clear in that if you're going to take any sort of kind of qualitative characteristics into consideration, you have to make that very clear up front to all the bidders.
Okay.
Bids came in and, there was some warranties with some other, and obviously I'll let True add into this too, with some pre-existing turf. There was just some other things that ultimately probably saved the district money. But if they're kind of decided on after the fact and not all of the bidders are maybe made aware of it up front, that's where it got just a little complicated. So there was absolutely bids done. And actually the reason for it was that, they were trying to take into consideration things that would actually probably be cheaper to the district. But that was where it came in. And I will tell you, it was a complicated one. We actually kind of had to go back and forth with some documents and kind of figure out what all we had before we concluded.
So it was only that one instance that we're,
Yep.
Yeah, and again, this was a bit complicated, and I had to bring the contractors here to meet with the
Yeah, we did. We
auditors.
actually chatted with them.
And this is something, so the turf field, that's something we've never done in over 20 years. So what happened is when the bids were submitted, based on statute, you have to pick up the lowest bidder.
Right.
But then what we discovered is once they pulled the turf, there's some underlying material underneath which may be requiring replacement, which requires a warranty. So the lowest bidder actually, if we put the warrants into place, it was going to be more expensive. So what they did is they went with the bidder was a little bit higher by like $2,000, whose warranties were actually more advantageous to the district over time.
Yeah.
So that's what really kind of transpired and led us to that finding.
So yeah, the thing we talked about too is that if it's going to get a little complicated like that, there's an option to do what is considered a best value procurement, which you might be familiar with, where it's not necessarily going with the lowest bidder. You just have to have that criteria has to be very clear up front and published to the bidders. Say, here's what we're factoring in, and here's how we're going to weight it potentially, or how we're going to consider it.
okay.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Other questions or comments for this team, who we'll see again at the meeting?
Excellent. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Michelle?
And you still have a budget presentation, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
I do.
I might step
Thank
down.
you.
Director
Thank you.
Chattanooga has to stay.
All right, let's turn it over to Tara.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So now we can transition to the budget. What I have here is the revised budget for fiscal year 23 and the preliminary budget for fiscal year 24. And as alluded by the auditors, we do have a strong financial framework, and is presented previously around enrollment, around the budget, and going into fiscal year 23, we had projected a very positive enrollment into the district, and then what we found out was those numbers didn't really meet what we were anticipating, so we had to go back to the drawing board, make some adjustments to reflect what we are anticipating as the enrollment for this year, which went down by about close to 200 students. Without wanting to impact any of the operations going into our buildings and departments, we didn't go back and really made any hard adjustments by terminating staff just because of the fact that what we'd anticipated didn't turn out to be what really was the actual enrollment into our buildings. What we did is encourage buildings to make some organic adjustments into their budgets so that we don't end up with a big gap within our actual revenues and expenditures, and our projected revenues and expenditures as was initially presented to the board in June of fiscal year 22. So what I have here is the revised general fund budget for fiscal year 23. We've made some adjustments. We are still making adjustments. We've communicated with leadership and staff to, one, pay attention to resource usage, knowing that 80 to 82% of our resources are people, and adjust on where we can make adjustments with supplies, with purchase services, really looking at utilities, really looking at transportation. And I know based on some of the discussions we've had, where we were anticipating close to $2 million. So we've made some adjustments. We've also factored in optimal ways of using some of the ESSA resources we have so that we can reduce that gap. So we've done a lot of work behind the scenes. We are still within the fiscal year. So right now, what we are anticipating to be our revised fiscal year 23 general fund revenue is $110,522,538. And this doesn't factor in any of the ESSA resources. And our general fund expenditures are anticipated to end at $111,790,399, which gives us a deficit of $1,267,861. And again, a lot of this information will come to make more sense once we close our books after June 30th. And then we have the auditors in, and I'm hoping that our next audit will not be presented in April, but in November, December, so that we give the board and the community a better picture of where we are for the current fiscal year. So that's what we have for our general fund. An anticipated deficit of $1,267,861. And again, based on what was presented through the audit, we do have a very positive fund balance. So any of these deficits will be eaten into the fund balance. Again, that general fund budget didn't factor in the ESSA dollars. So for fiscal year 23, we had planned between ESSA 2 and some of the different allocations we got from the state and the federal government, about $2,805,474 in ESSA revenue, and total expenditures of $2,805,474. With ESSA dollars, it's use it or lose it. So we are trying to be very intentional in how we are actually using these resources and maximizing them so that we don't end up losing those dollars. For food service, again, based on us shifting from where we were using the summer food service program, where meals were provided for free for all our scholars in fiscal year 22. And as Ms. Hoffman presented, there was actually a very positive outcome out of those food services meals which were served, and a huge increase. If you look at prior years, fiscal year 23 reverted back to using the National School Lunch Program, where we go back to students paying for their meals, either at full price, at a reduced price, or at free. So that being said, what we had initially projected as our original budget of about $4.1 million has been revised to $3,574,380, and I'll explain part of the reason why there is a reduction in that budget. And our food service expenses revised at $4,003,300. So we are anticipating a deficit of about $428,920. And part of that, part of the reason of that deficit has to do with some of the programs which had been run in the past. When we had optimal staff, and we've been having challenges in hiring people. So the a la carte menu, which was anticipating like $400,000 in revenue, which was basically the cash cow for food service, that program was not run due to shortages in staff. So we ended up anticipating a reduction in our revenues of about $400,000. We also are dealing with negative balances in our food service accounts, and naturally, at the end of the year, those balances end up hitting the general fund just to prop up the food service account. Again, enrollment drives a lot of the revenue, so our revised numbers, which we're anticipating at projection level, 200 more students, ended up getting revised to where we are anticipating at least 200 less students, and some of the shifts in programs at the high school. That's what led to that deficit we are anticipating in food services. But food service does have a very healthy fund balance as of fiscal year 22 audited financial statements of $1,130,083. So the $428,000 deficit for this year will be actually covered through the available fund balance for food services. The next item is on community education, and I also have Director Fisher available to come and provide some more information in terms of the original budget and the revised budget. What we have for the revised budget for community education is we are revising our community education revenue to $9,909,729. And our community education expenses to $10,718,028, a deficit of $808,299. I would like to invite Director Fisher to come and give us some more context into the $808,299 deficit for the current fiscal year before we proceed.
Hello, Chair Westmoreland. Hello, Board Directors. Thank you, Director Chapanduka.
Good evening.
So I think I first learned about the increases in the community ed budget when we were talking about salary increases. It's so important to maintain and hire staff, especially in childcare, where the experience and qualification of the staff directly impact the service we provide. So it was worth it to increase salaries. That was a big reason for the deficit this year. Another kind of contributing factor was sub costs in preschool. It's been a tough year across the district for subs, and preschool especially has a very high level program with excellent teachers, and we want to maintain that standard of education. And so we've had a very high sub cost this year. Preschool meal costs also, it's important to provide nutritious meals, and that comes at a cost, so that's part of the reason. Preschool screening is another reason. It's one of those services that are essential to make sure that children have the early interventions needed so that they can get the service they need at an early age. And the reimbursement costs from the state don't cover our costs. So the expenses that we get for that, or the money we receive doesn't cover what we spend. And that ends up costing our district as well. And then, finally, the community education levy has remained the same since 2005. And I know it's in the current education omnibus bill to increase, but that won't happen until 2025. So we'll kind of stand pat for the next couple of years, and then we'll expect an increase there. So we're looking forward to that.
Yeah, that being said, thank you, Director Fisher. Community Ed does have a very healthy fund balance. So based on the fiscal year 22 audited financials, the fund balance is $3,203,421, meaning that the $808,299 will be absorbed into the fund balance. And as we move to the fiscal year 24 preliminary, we'll also show some positive variance going into next year and beyond. So that's what I have for the fiscal year 23 revised budget. I'll take any questions from board members before we move to the fiscal year 24 preliminary information.
Thank you very much. I had a question for Director Fisher. So some of these, the reasons for the community ed budget deficit, including like salary increases, meal costs. We have meals next year. I kept thinking of that every time we looked at nutrition stuff. I'm like, whew. And the interpreter costs, preschool screening. We know these are things that will continue into next year. What is the plan to maintain a balanced budget as we wait for that levy increase?
That's a good question. One of the main things, which we'll do is to increase fees in community education by 17%. That will be offset by a very large scholarship fund with Resource West. You may know we have a great partnership with them. We have over $100,000 in child care scholarships available to our families for child care. So although we are increasing costs to help cover some of the deficit, there will be aid available to families that need it.
Thank you. Other questions or comments on the fiscal year 23 budget? And we'll be seeing this again during the meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we can continue.
Thank you, Director Fisher. So for fiscal year 24 preliminary budget, what we did is we started with some of the allocation priorities and objectives, and some of this information has already been shared through CFAC. One key factor was what was presented this evening by Dr. Lightfoot and Director Eto around transition 6th and 9th grades to middle school and high school beginning in fiscal year 23-24. And that was one of the priorities and objectives around the budget. The other components around growing Chinese, Spanish outdoor immersion, project-based learning, as well as multi-age classrooms and virtual EDU. And any details to some of these programs, I will revert back to Dr. Mary Pirid or Director Eto. Investing in early childhood and preschool learning, as well as K-5 enrichment and school-wide talent development. Focusing on instructional quality and academic rigor, including letters, science of reading training for K2 teachers, reimagining K-12 math, school-wide talent development and enrichment for K6, and increasing rigorous course and career pathway enrollment for 9th to 12th graders. Strengthening career technical education pathways at Hopkins High School. Restorative practices and wellness programs, as well as enhanced predictable staffing model to optimally allocate resources across all programs in our buildings. And as alluded by the superintendent, we did start this work way back in August, September, and we've been meeting on a weekly basis, going through some of the programs, some of the priorities, which led us to developing the budget we'll be presenting today. One of the key factors which comes to play when it comes to planning and budgeting is enrollment. And as I had mentioned earlier on, that for the current fiscal year, we did see a shift in enrollment, which was actually caused by factors we have not seen in the past, part of which is around mobility, with some of the students either moving out of state or out of the country. And we did go back trying to compare information from prior years, and we just found out that this year was a bit of a different shift. And we did go back and revise our enrollment numbers to reflect what we are anticipating going into the future. Also putting in consideration a lot of the new changes which are happening in the district, one with the 6-9 grade configuration, which has not happened in the past, as well as some of the operational, instructional, and workplace initiatives we are embarking on as a system. So enrollment does play a factor. Outside of enrollment, we also factored a number of allocation components, one starting with the base allocation, which is determined through predictable staffing model. Our preliminary allocations are not factoring in any state revenue increase, so what we are presenting today is based on a 0% state revenue increase. We'll definitely come back to the board once we get more information from the state of any increases to revenue. We also factored in with guidance from the Citizen Financial Advisory Council, a 3% cost of living adjustment, a 3% fringe benefits inflationary increase, a 7% purchase services, supplies, utilities, and energy inflation increases. We also did some shift in how some of the categorical funding being allocated, moving from a structure which was based on certain factors into district-wide. So when we start to look at title allocations, ADSIS, achievement and integration, there were some changes this year compared to what we have done in the past. The allocations do not factor in any ESSER 3 funds at this point in time. And our general unassigned fund balance is also based on fiscal year 22 financial statement at this point in time, unaudited, but as presented by Ms. Hoffman, we are still anticipating around an unassigned fund balance of about 10%. So those are the factors we put into consideration when we developed this initial preliminary budget. Like I said, we'll come back to the board later on once we get more information from the state, either this fiscal year or on a revised budget next year. So our total general fund revenue, based on the factors I have alluded here, is $116,880,277, and about 15.1% of that is through the operating referendum. 4.7% is through location equity, which is local options. About 11% of the budget, or $12.9 million, is through capital projects levy, which is voter funded. 1.2% is through achievement and integration aid. 4.4% is through compensatory revenue. 0.3% is through English language proficiency. 9.4% or $10.9 million is special education state aid. 2.6 or $3 million is federal grants. 0.4% is extended time, and about 51% is non-categorical revenue. So total revenue is based on what we projected and assumptions, and a 0% increase amounts to $116,880,277. On the expenditure side, 56% or $65.4 million is salaries and wages. 24% or $27.4 million is benefits. 14.82% or $17.3 million is purchase services. 2.87% or $3.3 million is supplies. 1.4% or $1.7 million is capital expenditures. 1.3% or $1.5 million is other expenditures, to give us a total expenditure of $116,880,277, which is structurally balanced. We then went and broke down all these expenditures to just give you a better idea of how much of the resources are being directed to schools, how much are being directed to district-wide initiatives, and how many of the resources are going to departments. So about $67.1 million or 57%, these are direct allocations going into buildings. 37% or $43.6 million, these are district-wide allocations. So when I say district-wide allocations, this includes transportation. Transportation is budgeted at the district-wide level, but going into buildings. This includes our custodians, our operations and maintenance. This includes some of the technological initiatives. This includes some of the risk components around insurance, our other post-employment benefits. They all fall within the district-wide allocations. Some of the special ed allocations all fall into district-wide. And then 5% or $6.1 million is department allocations. These are departments who support buildings. So when you look at the business office, payroll, accounts receivable, accounts payable, when you look at human resources, recruitment and retention of employees, when you look at governance and management, the superintendent's office, the board, they all fall within the department allocations. So 57% direct school allocations, 37% district-wide allocations, and 5% is department allocations. For food service, for fiscal year 24, our preliminary budget for food service is $3,961,042 for revenue, and our food service expenditures are $3,890,878. So we are anticipating a surplus of about $70,164. Again, going into fiscal year 24, we'll be using the universal meals, so we're trying to be very careful in terms of what we project as participation, just putting into consideration this program coming back. And we did play with some previous numbers to come up with an optimal conservative level of resources coming in. And if anything changes, we'll definitely be back to the board table. For community education, our preliminary budget allocations, revenue, $11,101,326, and expenditures, $11,064,462. So we are anticipating a surplus of about $36,863 for community ed. Other consideration for fiscal year 24, again, there's still some economic ramifications, and we are not certain. One, when we start to look at some of those one-time resources we received through either the ESSA allocations, which will become unavailable. So we'll try by all means to be very careful and conservative on how we are allocating resources going into the future, just considering that, some of the programs or some of the staff we had been paying using those one-time funds, and those funds not being available, we'll have to make some shifts. Declining student enrollment for the foreseeable future, just putting into consideration what has happened this year. We'll also try to be watchful of any market trends or any environmental trends which may require us to make some adjustment if need be. We'll also try to be very conservative when it comes to projections going into the future. Legislative biennium budget settlements are unknown beyond the current year, so again, we are still waiting for word from the state of any increases we would be anticipating going into next year. If there's any information which comes our way, we'll try by all means to factor that in and bring this information back to the board. We are also keeping a watchful eye on inflationary factors which may have an impact on our budget as we move into fiscal year 24. That being said, I will take any questions from the board. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Chapman-Duca, and looking forward to revisiting this conversation during the meeting. Yes, we can do some questions. I'm also just mindful that we need to do photos before the meeting starts at 7 and probably get a little break in too for folks. So with that in mind, Vice Chair Andreessen, did you?
Oh, well, I'm happy to wait. I just had a couple of clarifying questions. When you said that we had around 10% of our revenue is special education, you said state aid. Is that only the state portion of special education funding, not the federal?
So that's the 10 is just the state aid.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the difference, that's this cross-subs, which actually comes out of the regular state aid, but that 10 is just the state component earmarked for special education.
Of the full cross-subsidy.
Yeah, so if you look at the overall picture, our budget for special education is about $16-17 million. So that difference is between the 10 is what's being funded either out of federal aid or the cross-subs from the general education aid.
Okay, great. And then you mentioned in our expenditures something called purchased services. Just quickly, what are those?
Sure. So purchase services, again, I'm just using some of the UFAS terms. So purchase services is things like contracted services. So we contract our transportation. So every expenditures which is tied to any contracted services with either third parties or goods from outside vendors falls within purchase services outside of supplies like books and pencils. A lot of
Our teachers on call, the subs and things like that would be
correct.
included in that as well.
Correct.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments at this point? Great. Thank you very much, Director Chapin-Duca and Director Fisher, and we will see you during the meeting.
Thank you.
You're the main event, Director Chapin-Duca, during the meeting tonight, so. Okay. With that, we will end this workshop. I'll see everyone back at the table shortly before 7, and we have some photos to do, so don't go too far.
Struggling, which I don't care.
This meeting of the Hopkins School Board is called to order at 7:03 PM. I'd like to welcome our community members who have joined us here in the physical space as well as via the YouTube live stream. We are going to go around the table and introduce ourselves as board members, and then our student board reps will introduce themselves during their wonderful student board member reports. So Director Ross, we'll start with you.
Good evening. My name is Director Jason Ross. I have 3 children who attend Tangleton Elementary, 2 soon-to-be 10-year-olds and 1 soon-to-be 7-year-old as of Saturday, this coming Saturday. So that's going to be pretty exciting in the Ross household with all these birthday parties. I've lived in the community now for 10+ years. And we enjoyed this opportunity to be residents of Minnetonka and then have our children in the Hopkins school system. Thank you.
We're invited to the birthday parties, right?
All right.
You are.
Good.
My youngest might not let you in if you don't have a present.
Understandably.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tanya Khan. I have had 2 kids in the district. They both graduated from Hopkins. Currently, they're both attending the University of Minnesota. I myself have been a resident of Hopkins for 12 years, and I also worked for the Hopkins School District for at least over 7 years. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Shannon Andreessen, and welcome to everyone. I have been a school board member. This is my 4th year, and have 2 students in the district, a recent graduate who is at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, and a 9th grader at West Junior High, and have been living in Minnetonka for 15 years.
Good evening, I'm Jen Westmoreland, she, her pronouns. I currently serve as chair of the Hopkins School Board. I am in the middle of my 2nd term. I have a 6th grade student at Eisenhower Jingxing. I'm a proud graduate of Hopkins Schools. I've lived in this community off and on my entire life, and it's such an honor to serve in this capacity on the board.
Good evening. My name is Rhoda Marie Perry-Reed, Superintendent of Schools for Hopkins. I have a 5th grader at Eisenhower, a 9th grader at North, and a stepson who is a kindergarten paraprofessional at Eisenhower Elementary.
I'm Steve Adams, member of the board for almost 12 years now. We moved into the district 37 years ago, believe it or not, and we have 2 grown children that went through the Hopkins School District from Tangleton Elementary to North Junior High to the high school, and are successful, hardworking adults now. I'm pleased to be here.
Hi, my name is Katie O'Shea Peterson. Entering my 4th year on the school board. I have a 5th and a 6th grader at Meadowbrook and have lived in district for 13 years.
Good evening. I'm Director Rachel Hartland, and I have 3 children who are approaching the end of their 7th, 5th, and 3rd grade years. And my spouse and I first open enrolled our oldest in Hopkins after really careful consideration of all of our metro options, and then very quickly moved here once it became apparent that it was our academic community and values perfect match. And so we have been here very happily for 6.5 years now, and I am proud to be in my 2nd year on the board.
Thank you very much. So our next agenda item is open agenda. This is typically the time when we hear public comment. And there are 2 options for giving public comment to the school board. The first option is to leave a voicemail. before the meeting begins, and there are instructions on how to do that in the board packet. Then we play those voicemails publicly during the meeting. The second option is to appear here in person, fill out a public comment card in the back of the room, and hand it to me before the meeting begins. And this evening, we received no voicemails and no public comment cards. So we'll move on to our reports, and we'll start with our student board representatives' reports. And I hear regularly from community members that this is the best part of school board meetings, and I have to agree. So I will turn it over to all three of you. We're so lucky to have three of our board reps at the table tonight.
All right. I am Grace Riley, one of our junior class representatives for Hopkins High School. And before we start any of the reports, Oscar, one of our senior representatives, is currently in Florida as he is representing Hopkins DECA this week. So just keeping him in mind today and well wishes for him going forward. In other news, the IB committee has reached their conclusion and will present their proposal soon, so we are very much looking forward to that. And then SKIP, or Schools and Communities in Partnership, had a resource fair during third block 3 weeks ago, and multiple organizations were present. There was handing out of straws, reusable straws, candy, as well as flashlights, so it was a very successful time for students. And then we had a summer job fair was held on April 19th, also during third block and all three lunches. We had organizations like the Parks and Rec Committee, as well as the Hopkins Fire team there as well. And then also on the 19th, senior Sam Badson gave the high school the opportunity to listen to a Holocaust survivor. Manny shared his story and responded to several questions that scholars had. This discussion, led by our senior Sam, lended itself to an opportunity to share deeper insights about times during the Holocaust. HHS would like to say thank you to Manny for his time and the sharing of his amazing story, and thank you to Sam for bringing it to us. Some lack of knowledge around the 6th and 9th grade move has left most scholars at the high school kind of lacking in information as to what school in general will look like next year. As those on the board obviously know, that there are a multitude of ways and reasons that this is the best option and why it will work for us going forward. That has not been communicated to students very well. Common themes that we're seeing are there seems to be a lack of room in the lunchroom and in hallways, which again, we know is not the case, but it kind of leaves a lot of anxious feelings, especially going into fourth term and going into the summer, not really having a concrete plan presented. So that is something that we're just kind of keeping in mind, and we would ultimately like to explore options to have some way, shape, or form of that plan that we all know is being presented in a wider setting. And then another reason of anxiety, for lack of a better term, for scholars at the end of this year is the introducing of detentions. There's mostly lack of a unified system. Some scholars have gotten emails, some who have violated the policy, which is 3 unexcused absences in any block, any class, for like 1 term. Some scholars have gotten emails, some scholars have just been told by teachers that it's coming, and some students have gotten no communication whatsoever. There's been no formal introduction of like where they're being held, when they're being held, after school, before school, during school. which ultimately leaves a lot of scholars with nothing changing. Introducing detention was supposed to make sure that scholars got to their classes on time and made sure, that they were in school and that they were present for all of the learning that's supposed to occur. But because of the lack of unified systems and the lack of understanding that's been put around detentions, it just really deepens the distrust and lack of communication between students and admin. And when asked about it, several students in our senior year called it laughable. Obviously, this is not what we like to see and not what we like to hear. And in our class meetings, which we'll hear about more later in the other reports, there wasn't really a reasoning given beyond tardies as to why detentions are supposedly being put in place. So there just seems to be a lot of miscommunication going on. If the administrative team has a deeper reason, that has not been portrayed or presented to the students in any way, shape, or form. So yeah, just kind of overall, detentions are not going well. And frankly, they're not happening really at all. So that is unfortunately where I will end today. And I will pass off to Elif.
Grace, do you mind if we ask you a couple
Oh, sure.
questions first? So at our workshop, we had an update on the grades 6 and 9 transition. And I know there's been a lot of work done at the junior highs, which will be middle schools next year, to welcome families in, because it'll be, 2/3 of the students will be new there. And listening to what you were saying about the high school, I'm really curious from students' perspectives, what like meaningful engagement would look like around that transition, and like what information you would like, how you would like it communicated to you, so that people are in the know going into summer, so you can anticipate some of these things in the fall, which is important.
Yeah, I think speaking personally, as far as terms of communication, slideshows along with a presentation like the one that we saw in the workshop work really well. They're a pretty easily understandable, easily accessible way for information to get across. And I think as far as the way that would be presented, I think even something as simple as having someone come in to present that information and not even necessarily making it required in a sense, but just kind of sharing the information maybe in a newsletter or an announcement, just simply stating if you want to know what the overall plan is, if that's something that you're interested in, because many scholars are, this is when it will be hosted. This is kind of an information, informal kind of setting. Personally, I think that's what would work the best, but obviously open to other ideas as well.
I completely agree with what Grace has brought up. I think a lot of students would like to see maybe concrete numbers in terms of population, and knowing that we won't be stuffed in a hallway because it's already crowded. So if students can see that you guys have done, the research that this is actually going to work out, then they're going to accept it. But right now, we have no idea what's going on.
I'm sure everybody watched the workshop, so it's fine now, right?
It's the best thing to do after school.
So the curiosity is really around kind of use of space and how many people there will be in the high school next year, and kind of some of those questions. Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Of
course.
Any other questions for Grace? All right, who's next?
I'll go next. Great. My name is Elif. I am the junior student board representative. Just want to echo what Grace had brought up about the lack of information given to students and in regards to the transition to 9th grade at the high school, as well as the detentions. I think it just seems like an empty threat when you say it and then no actions follow, especially because this is being enacted at the end of the school year. And then other than that, this is the first year we received a day off of school for Eid, thanks to Oscar's work last year, which is just wonderful because students were able to celebrate at home with their families. And it just brings us one step closer in establishing religious acceptance rather than just tolerance throughout our community, especially because we have such large Jewish and Muslims communities. AP exams begin in May. Everyone is really stressed out, including me. So that's something to look forward to. And prom is coming up, which is something super exciting for juniors and seniors. And lastly, tomorrow is Denim Day, which is an important day because we are honoring Sexual Violence Awareness Month, and all students and staff are encouraged to wear denim to combat victim blaming and educate others about sexual violence, as it is such a pervasive issue throughout all communities, including ours. Thank you.
Thank you. Elif, I was thinking about you the other day because some of the legislation that you worked so hard on last year with Representative Feist passed.
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Sure. So the legislation funds for menstrual products in all schools in Minnesota. I've always been passionate about women's rights, and this is very prevalent to me because I go to high school with many students who can't afford products, and hopefully this is going to help a lot of our students.
Great, thank you for your work on that. Any other questions for Elif? Samia.
Hi, my name is Samia or Mia. I'm the sophomore representative, and so I think everyone already knows, but it was recently Eid, and we finally had the day off. And in past years, personally, I did not want to miss school because, in junior high, I didn't want to miss school because I knew missing a day would mean I have to make it up. So I tend to not miss school on Eid and had to celebrate on the weekend. So it was really nice to actually celebrate it on the day it was meant. And I know many students had to miss school on that day and then had to make it up. So it was, again, it was really nice. And when it was Ramadan, many students were utilizing the library during their lunches, and it was really nice time to have a spot reserved for us. So sit instead of having to watch our classmates eat food in front of us, which makes our fasting harder than it needs to be. Today and tomorrow we are doing MCA testing. Yesterday was the makeup for the test we had in March. On sophomores was reading and juniors was math, and then tomorrow is our science MCA. So excited for it. So a week ago, we had meetings in the auditorium for each grade. I don't know what junior and seniors talked about, but for sophomores, ours was basically just the same thing they've been telling us every term, don't be absent. And they did introduce the new thing about detentions, which I don't know how that thing was going, but clearly, as Grace told us, it's not going well. And they were explaining how we should end the year strong because it's the last term. And then for sophomores, they weren't really as engaged. And we kind of just, most majority of us just kind of sat there. And but at the end, we did play a big Kahoot, and I think it was a really nice way to bring everyone back together as they were zoning out through the lecture and everything, not paying attention. Coming up on May 4th is Culture Night, and you can get tickets for free to reserve a spa. It's not money, and you can invite up to 4 of your family and friends. Wednesday through Saturday is the play Eurydice. I think that's how you pronounce it. My apologies. And our amazing performers and our stage crew have been working months for it. So if you want to check it out, it's 4 days. With sports, so track had 3 meets already, and today they actually had another one. Varsity won 2 of those games, and the boys won 1. Baseball has 6 meets. I'm not really sure how it's been going because I haven't been watching it, but their baseball diamond club is trying to raise supplements for funds for things such as team equipment, coaches, field improvement, and facility maintenance. And lastly, I found out this morning, but we have a golf team, and they had a meet today at 9 a.m. So. And then, so there's this club called Girls Taking Action, and every Wednesday during 5th block they meet, and they're doing something similar to the community project that we did in 9th grade, except this is solely for POC girls, and they're not gonna receive like a grade for it like they did with the community project. This is like for what you wanna do for fun. And after like we do it, we were presented to the members, Girls Taking Action members from other schools with a tea party and show like what we learned and like what we did. And then also talking about it on May 11th, we are going to General Mills or a museum. Like we're not really sure because we were supposed to go to a museum like a week ago, but it got canceled. So we might either move it to the day we're supposed to go to General Mills or go to General Mills. And then yesterday in home base, they told us that if we want to, as sophomores, we can sign up in SST for the College and Career Series during Royals Connect. And the sign-up's opening until May 1st. And basically, it's like teaching us how to use Naviance for college and career planning tool, complete a personal inventory to identify career options, learn about in-person and virtual college visits, and ACT registration and prep information, because like we're doing it next year. And then I just want to say, like, I saw this in a classroom, but I mean, I don't know how true it is, but apparently there are only 31 days left of school, so.
Not that anyone is
So
counting.
you're not counting, Mia?
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mia. Wow, so many exciting things going on. Are you doing one of those projects for the Girls Take Action?
Yes, actually, I could say my idea of like what I'm doing with my friends, but what we're doing was we were thinking about like, well, transportation, obviously, so we can't go too far, but like what our idea was walking to Tanglin and like giving the 6th graders like a Q&A about middle school, because they're coming up, plus with the 5th and 6th graders, they're both coming up together, so we're thinking like giving them like a Q&A, because like they're only gonna have the 7th graders that will be in 8th grade, so it's like they don't have much like people to help them and support them through it, so we're like trying to like prepare them beforehand so they know like it's not as scary as the movies tell you. We're not going to be in fights every day, you know, we're not like skipping class and stuff, you know.
What a wonderful idea, and I'm sure they'll love it, and it will be comforting, and they'll get to see and meet some really amazing role models, so I love that.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments for our board reps before we move on? Student board reps.
I do have a quick question. For Mia, you mentioned the kind of 10th grade sort of college options, this event. It was one of the last things that you spoke about. Do you feel like 10th graders and possibly in other grades as well, maybe you two have some insight, do you hear about those things in a timely manner, and are they well attended?
Well, for the home base, I feel like they tell us in a timely manner, but like I feel like it doesn't like most people don't find out about it as soon as they can, because for example from the home base announcements, if you actually paid attention then you would know, but some kids like they don't either, like they have passes to go to different classes, go to the library, and they're not always there to hear it. So I feel like the word could be like given to students like much better. But I feel like it is given in a timely manner because, like, you know, in like 3 months we're gonna be juniors, so it's like it's best to start like now. If you guys want to say anything about it.
I mean, I think at least from a junior standpoint, it's not so much as like communication from like Royals Connect blocks. But more from our counselors directly. I know Counselor Vang has sent out, I want to say close to 5 or 6 emails throughout the course of the year, just kind of detailing either colleges that are coming here or like to areas near here, or sorry, not to here, to the high school. So yeah, I mean, I think the best way to put it is like if you're paying attention as you should be, the message will get across, for sure.
Thank you. Thanks to all three of you for being here tonight. Next, we'll move on to our superintendent's report. I will turn it over to Dr. Mary Peary-Reed.
Thank you, Chair Westmoreland, and thanks, Elise, for presenting on my behalf, and thanks to our student board reps always for your quality reports. So I have lots of great highlights to share with all of you this evening. For starters, Gatewood Elementary and West Junior High are evolving their schools into community school models, which are places of learning where students can receive holistic support, wraparound services, and where staff and the school community have really valuable partnerships with organizations and businesses in our surrounding community. So here's a snapshot of students at Gatewood having their hair trimmed and styled by a visiting barber. And also at West Junior High, soon to be West Middle School, and that school is really doing a fabulous job of expanding their services to include a grocery store. So with a Paige Becker's Splash Surprise visit recently, guests had a great time at the grand opening of the food pantry. So we'd like to recognize Dr. Camphy and the staff, Ms. Beckers, and also our local ICA food shelf for supporting Hopkins. And really what is our quest to be vigilant about equity and serve all of our families who have specific needs. And on these subsequent slides are a few highlights showcasing how our Hopkins scholars are demonstrating grad traits that are components of our graduate profile, or I should say competencies within our graduate profile. So first, we aspire to have our scholars be globally minded and well-traveled, and now that the pandemic presents much lower risks, our students are able to travel once again, at least to certain places. So over spring break, 39 advanced placement history students and 6 teachers traveled to Portugal and Spain. The group explored Roman ruins, experienced a Holy Week procession, saw a famous Picasso painting, and tried a variety of delicious food. These well-traveled scholars came back with a new appreciation and understanding for all of the things that they've been learning in their classrooms. In Hopkins, we also want our scholars to have and project their voice. So on April 17, about 30 Hopkins students participated in Youth Day at the Capitol. They began their day at the Minnesota History Center, where they learned how to be an effective advocate for critical issues important to them or important across our global space. And then students marched to the Capitol, where they toured the building and met with local state representatives, Patty Acom and Kelly Morrison. Having and demonstrating a balance of confidence and empathy are 2 additional traits of the Hopkins graduate. And also advocating for the needs of others is a really powerful way to practice empathy. So, not that she wanted the attention, however, our very own Scholar Board rep, Elif Öztürk, could not have made it clearer to policymakers when she shared a powerful message about students, in particular teens, who really need to be supported during the school day. So she made a case for Minnesota to provide the free menstrual products in public schools, and as we heard earlier, Representative Feist's bill has passed due to advocacy from several students statewide who have really been pushing this legislation forward. So thank you, Elif, for your leadership on that. As referenced by Mia earlier, another one of our Scholar Board reps, we want our students to be holistic. And when I think of holistic, I think of a characteristic that represents balanced. I think of someone who can think and process in comprehensive ways, someone who can draw important connections across multiple spaces. Holistic thinkers often shine when they are being interviewed about critical topics. So seniors Nuzeba Saeed and Miriama Ahmed were interviewed by NPR's Kathy Wurzer about their experience with Hopkins acknowledging Muslim holy days, such as Eid, which we recognized this past Friday. And as we know, Eid marks the end of the holy month of Ramadan. And so very thankful to our scholars who are exemplifying many leadership traits and Hopkins grad qualities in several ways. This week is After School Professionals Appreciation Week, so our school leaders, our community education staff, and truly all of us are taking time to recognize and thank our after-school professionals who serve more than 650 students before and after school. So after-school professionals include our Kids and Co staff, our ECFE assistants, preschool assistants, youth enrichment instructors, and other professionals who work either before school or after school to ensure our students not only are properly supervised, but are engaged in enrichment activities to supplement their core learning. So we really love and appreciate our after-school professionals. It is almost May, a month which is always full of school celebrations and student showcase events and many opportunities for our community to gather and experience the goodness in Hopkins. And there's too many events to mention all of them. However, some include The Wizard of Oz premiering at Alice Smith this week, 5th and 6th grade orchestra concert at Eisenhower next week, a denim fashion show at the high school next week, and 5th grade poetry night at Gatewood, and so much more. But a couple of events that we wanted to highlight for our board and community are HEF's Royal Family Day here at Eisenhower this Sunday, and also the Resource West Spring Fest annual fundraiser happening on Saturday, May 6th at the Minnetonka Community Center. So we hope to see many of you at both events. And thank you, Principal Ballard, for also reminding me that it is Administrative Assistant Professionals Week as well. So we have many administrative assistants serving in all of our schools and also here at the district office. And we extend our gratitude to those professionals as well for all of the ways that they support school and district activity. And finally, we are entering into a busy calendar of parent engagement events. So we invite our board members. We will send you an invite to these events. We're scheduling parent engagement sessions with our parent-teacher organizations at our elementary schools and also our parent groups at our secondary schools. So here's the schedule of those events. We actually had 2 successful engagement sessions with Tanglin parents, and I appreciate many members of our Innovation Design and Learning team who are accompanying me on these visits. So what we hope to achieve at these visits, it's just a touch point with our parents and an opportunity to get together in person to talk about what are our scholars doing in classrooms each and every day. What do we want our pedagogy to look like? What is restorative culture? What are the restorative practices that we're exercising across our schools, and really be there to answer questions parents may have about their students' everyday schooling experiences, and also just to engage in an authentic and genuine way. So we're looking forward to these events. And with that, I would take any questions if you have them.
Great, thank you very much. So next I would look for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
I have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, I would look for a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
I have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, we'll move on to our treasurer's report with Treasurer Adams.
Thank you, Chair Westmoreland. Expenses of note this time were $25,600 to the Minnesota State High School League Section 6 for the boys and girls basketball playoff games where we collected admission fees. And that gets remitted to the State High School League. $103,384 for special ed transportation for March. And it continues, $28,558 for snow removal and salt for the snow event on March 31st through April 2nd. I was in Orlando for that. It was great until I returned home. And $14,598 for Hastings Creamery for milk, $640 to Hamel Maple Syrup Company. So our kiddos get maple syrup, real maple syrup. Over $720,000 for Meadowbrook remodeling, and I'm assuming that means what is formerly known as the Boy Scout building. And $25,000 for a public address upgrade at Glen Lake, and $9,220 for Hopkins registration at the DECA International Career Development Conference in Orlando that just wrapped up today, as was referenced earlier. Our board rep, Oscar, attended that, apparently. So with that, I move that we approve total disbursements in the amount of $1,708,419.43 for the period of April 6, 2023 through April 19, 2023.
I have a motion to approve the treasurer's report. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the treasurer's report. Any discussion? Yes.
I would just like to say that at Gatewood, they are making maple syrup.
Oh,
Oh,
So,
wow.
saving us money.
right. Maybe next year there won't be that $600. Gatewood will supply it for the district.
All right.
Go, increase
Great.
production. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, we'll move on to our new business. We only have one agenda item under new business tonight, and it is a big one. So I will turn it over to Dr. Mary Perry Reed and invite Director Chapanduka and Ms. Hoffman to the table.
Thank you, Chair Westmoreland. So as our colleagues are approaching the table, I'd like to introduce Michelle Hoffman, who's a principal at CLA, or Clifton Larson Allen, and works with Torero in leading our district-wide audit efforts. So she will provide a report on where we are with preliminary audit results. And then our Director of Business Services, Mr. Chapanduka, will provide an update on fiscal year 23 and 24, where we are with our budgeting process. I did explain during the workshop that I'm very grateful to our school leaders across Hopkins who have been very dedicated to gather together every Thursday morning for this entire year to engage in strategic plan aligned and very thoughtful budget planning under Torero's leadership. So there's a lot to share, a lot of work that has been done, and many thanks to members of the Business Services and Human Resources Office as we are nearing the end of the audit effort and working on getting towards what will be as close to a balanced budget as possible.
Thank you, Dr. Mary Reed. Good evening, Chair Westmoreland and respective board members. Actually, I'm very excited today to bring to the board table in the community our audit results for fiscal year 22. These are preliminary results. We'll be coming back to the board at the next board meeting to present the final audit report. It's been actually a challenging year in terms of putting everything together with a lot of staff turnover, which actually led us to delay the presentation of the audit. But I'm excited that I have Ms. Michelle Hoffman, principal at Clifton Lesson, here with me to present to the board the fiscal year 22 audit results. We'll go through the audit results, and after that, we'll jump into the fiscal year 23 revised budget, as well as the fiscal year 24 preliminary budget. With that said, I'll give the floor to Ms. Hoffman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chiro. Good evening, Superintendent, Board Chair, Board members. I'm happy to be here again presenting, and Chiro mentioned these are preliminary audit results. We are kind of finalizing some pieces of testing and putting together our overall final reports. But I would like to definitely also thank, Chiro and all his efforts. I know it's been a challenging year with some staffing, openings and things like that. So it's been definitely quite the process, and he's definitely had to work really hard to get where we are today. So I just want to say thank you. But as far as our overall audit results, we are planning to issue a clean or unmodified opinion on the financial statements. This is the best opinion we can give. If we felt we could not fully complete the audit or we were missing information, we would have to modify or potentially disclaim our opinion in some capacity. So I know unmodified doesn't necessarily sound really all that exciting, but that is the best opinion we can give. As far as Yellow Book compliance, which is just a reference to government accounting and auditing standards, we do not have anything that we are including as items of note with regard to non-compliance. In addition to auditing the numbers, doing a lot of testing around the actual numbers, presenting financial reports, we do look at some other areas as well, and that includes the internal controls around those numbers. And that is everything from day-to-day type transactions, year-end reconciliations, and those types of processes, just to make sure there are those checks and balances in place. There's reviews happening, a second set of eyes is looking at something, because of course, if not, that could potentially open the district up to risk. We just have one item to note with regard to improvement in the controls, and that is regard to material audit adjustments. We did have some additional reconciling with regard to state and federal aids just at year end, so we did have to post a couple adjustments related to those balances as part of the audit. Our federal single audit, as we call it, this is related to the compliance of all of your federal programs. Of course, your typical ones are your special education, Title I, your child nutrition program, and with some new grants these last couple of years related to kind of pandemic-related funding. But all of those get kind of put together. And if you spend more than $750,000 of federal funds, you're required to have this federal compliance audit. We audit 2, 3, 4 programs kind of depending every year. It's a risk-based approach. Generally, the larger, riskier programs are audited. So this year we are auditing the Education Stabilization Fund, which includes your ESSER funds, which I'm sure that's more of an acronym you probably use more often, and GEAR funds, although a lot of the GEAR funds are kind of, not a lot of those are left. So these would be your ESSER funds, as well as your Title I program. So we are auditing both those programs. We have a couple last pieces to finalize with the testing, but as of now, we have no items to note with regard to non-compliance in the federal program. And the last piece that we test outside of kind of the direct numbers is our Minnesota legal compliance. Minnesota, the Office of the State Auditor, publishes a checklist for auditors that applies to any public entities, school districts, cities, counties, et cetera. So we test kind of a whole list of state statutes and just make sure the district is in compliance with those. If we identified, anything that wasn't quite in line with statutes, we would include it there. We do have 2 items that we are noting, and one is related to, we test a sample of bids and procurements every year. So we're looking at least a handful, sometimes more, depending on how many you have. And we just had one that we did, that we are including, that had some tricky items that were after the bids were received, some additional discussion and sort of qualitative factors were applied to the decision. So we're just including that as far as some technicalities with regard to one bid that we looked at. And then also with regard to our uniform financial accounting and reporting standards, which is the state required sort of coding system for your chart of accounts. We had a couple items we had to reclass, and that maybe could have been coded a little bit better. So we're just including an item with regard to that as well. Moving on to some of the numbers and how the district ended up for the year ending June 30th, 2022. Taking a look at student enrollment, ADMs, or average daily membership, broken down by kind of grade level a little bit, obviously summarized. Secondary is considered 7 through 12 in this graph, and then 1 through 6 would be elementary. As you can see, the district had just over a 1% increase in your ADMs for fiscal 21 after a small decrease, fiscal 22, after a small decrease in fiscal 21 to end at 6,934 ADMs for the year. Taking a look at enrollment in sort of another way is, again, we have our total ADM served at the bottom there, but we're kind of coming at it a different way so you can see how many residents truly live in your district and how many of them are attending Hopkins Public Schools versus potentially open and rolling out. So you do have 7,137 school-age residents that fall within the district boundaries. And open and rolled out to whether it's a private school or another district, et cetera, is that just over 1,600 students. And then we do separate just kind of, it's interesting information, I think, charter school open enrollment out. So 539 students are also open enrolling out to charter schools, which, may also actually be in your district boundaries as well. So your net residents served are 4,971. And then sort of on the flip side, you do have students that are open enrolling in as well, as you know. So 1,900 students open enrolling in to arrive at that 6,934 average daily membership. All right, a quick look at general fund operations with some historical trends over the last few years. You can see the general fund did have an increase to fund balance of just under $2 million for fiscal 22. You can see revenues there ended at over 116 million, with the expenditures about 114.5 million. So ending fund balance of just over 22 million for the year. Taking a look at general fund expenditures by what we call object code, that's part of that UFARS coding, broken down into these 6 categories. We can take a look at our budget and actual for each of those. Of course, the majority, as you know, of your budget and your general fund is related to salaries and benefits of your employees. And those 2 items were under budget, as well as purchase services, and then a few other categories, there, a little bit over budget. But as a whole, your general fund was under budget by almost $2 million, or about 1.7%. Moving on to the food service fund, taking a look here. Food service fund definitely had a strong year with an overall revenues exceeding expenditures of $277,000. Overall, you can see revenues increased quite a bit from fiscal 21, kind of bouncing back a little bit to fiscal 20 years, but ending at a $1.1 million pretty strong fund balance in the food service fund. Our meals served, as you can see, we have a 5-year trend graph here. Certainly fiscal 21 and 22 look a little different than the first 3 years, as those are our 2 years where we were operating our seamless or summer food program. Basically what that allowed the district to do, and this is a nationwide thing, there were nationwide federal waivers. Districts could offer free meals to all students who chose to, whether they qualified on an income basis or not. In the past, when we looked at those first 3 years, students would potentially have to apply, submit income information to determine whether they met the federal guidelines of receiving a free or reduced price lunch, or certainly they could, if not, pay for a lunch. So the last 2 years, free meals were offered. So all the meals served were considered free, were reimbursed at the free rate by the federal government, which is why they're kind of looking, look at the color there shows that they're all free. Very nice increase to meals from fiscal 21 to 22 as we had, less remote learning days, et cetera. Of course, we'll see how this looks in a couple of years as the state now passed free meals for everyone. Anyway, different program, different funding source, but we'll see how that starts to look as well in future years. All right, and our community service fund operations, again, kind of looking at a 5-year trend. The last couple of years, the community service fund has had some nice bounce backs after decreases in fund balance from fiscal 18 to fiscal 20. So a nice increase in revenue, a slight increase in expenditures, but overall revenue exceeded expenditures by over 1.8 million to increase your fund balance in the community service fund to over 3.2 million for the year. And as you can see in some of those years past, and going back, if we went to 17 and prior, there would have been some as well. The general fund had transferred funds in the past, but at least recently, the community service fund has been very healthy and not necessarily needed some of those transfers. And with that, I will open up to any questions.
Thank you very much. Questions or comments from my board colleagues?
Chair Westmoreland.
Director Adams.
Thank you, Michelle. It's always, it's good to work with you on the audit committee, and it's always interesting to find out some new items every year. One thing I'd like to call the public's attention to is the student enrollment and open enrollment. I get a lot of questions as a school board member. Now, how many students are leaving the district? And I think you pointed out that open enrollment open enrollment out includes private schools as well, right?
Private schools, charter schools, homeschool, just about anything other than being enrolled in your district.
Okay. So it shows that last year our open enrollment out was about 1,600.
It was about 2,100 if you add the charter schools.
Right.
We broke, yep.
Right. But open enrollment in, I think, is at a record high, almost 2,000 students. So people can rest assured that we are not losing tons of students to other districts or to private schools right now. We're losing some, and I think we always will. I think every school district in the state is, because that was the whole point of open enrollment, was to allow flexibility for parents to move their kids from one district to another. There was one other item that caught my eye. The graph of lunches served to students.
Yes.
I just find it incredible that we served that many lunches last year, and because they were all free. And I think that indicates what the real demand is for meals from students in the state and in our district. And I'm so pleased that we're able to look forward to a year where we don't have to charge for meals anymore. It's something that's critical to families. It's critical to the learning. And thankfully, next year, we'll be able to hit that mark again, I'm sure, if not higher, so that our scholars don't have to worry about where their next meal's coming from. They can concentrate on learning. So I was very impressed by that, and looking forward to next year when we have the same experience. So
Yeah,
thank you.
640,000 is just lunches too. The district serves quite a few breakfasts as well. So of note that this is just lunch, 640,000 meals.
All right, great, thank you.
Thank you, Director Adams. Other questions and comments?
Yes, I have a question. Hi, you mentioned on the audit results, kind of this first page, some very minor internal controls and compliance issues. When you flag those, is it a flag alone, or do you then make recommendations back to the school district, and has the entire team been responsive on?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we finalize all the reports, there will be kind of formal letters that include these items. And so the internal control letter will have one item. It will describe it. It will also give the district a chance to put some wording in there as to a cause. That's part of the required thing, is to say, what would you describe as the reason for it? And then there's a corrective action piece as well. And so there's a lot of areas and that, we work with the district too to kind of craft that language, because some of it is certainly should be coming from the district. So there's corrective action, there is some language about the reasoning for it. So there's definitely a lot more narrative as to just kind of the situation.
Thank you.
I have a really boring question around process. Michelle, you said that you're planning to issue a clean audit report that we'll formally accept, and that this is kind of like the precursor to that. This is to update us on where we're at, so that we have this information as we go into this preliminary budget approval. Perhaps Director Chapanduka can help me with this. What do we need to do tonight with this audit report in terms of board action?
I don't believe anything, but.
Thank you, Chair Westmoreland. So today it's just informational.
Okay.
So when we come at the next board meeting, then you guys can approve the audit report. And I know just because of the fact that one, we are approving the preliminary fiscal year 24 in the revised budget, it is important that you also know the content around how we performed as a system in fiscal year 22. In normal circumstances, we would have had this information a long time ago, but as you know, we did have a lot of turnover, so we kind of started afresh on the audit, and I definitely want to thank the business office team for working very long hours, weekends, to get this information to the auditors. And I'm also thankful that we also had a strong fiscal year.
Well, we certainly appreciate the team's work, and it's essential for us to have this before we can move forward on budgets for next year, on approving budgets for next year. So really appreciate you getting this to us this evening. And Michelle, it's always such a pleasure working with you, and you do such a great job explaining the contents of the report, both to the board and our community at large. So appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I think I lost your student reps, though. They didn't want to. I bored them, I guess.
They're just off to like spread the good news about the clean audit report. That's where they went. So that it'll be all over TikTok tonight. Wonderful. So then we don't have to take any direct action on the audit report. So wondering if there are any questions or comments for Michelle before we move on to the budget.
I actually do have one more question.
Great. Yeah.
Does the audits, now you mentioned no compliance issues were noted with our review of laws, regulations, et cetera. And we know that we are in this time of incredible flux with regard to some laws and regulations. Does any piece of the audit, now I know audit by definition is kind of backwards looking, is there any piece to this, anything that was noted that potentially would be a red flag for some upcoming either known or speculated upon changes, or is that just completely outside the purview?
I mean, as far as, the scope of our audit, I mean, anything that, is already included here would cover that. So, and yeah, it's hard to say if there are, auditing standards are changing all the time, and there's some things coming up, but, there's nothing that we noticed that would be a concern for anything going forward. And we always, the typical approach there is to make sure that, and usually the district finance team is on top of it already, work with us to kind of proactively look for any of those things that are changing, if anything needs to change with regards to operations and things like that in the finance side. So I hope that answered your question. Sorry.
Again, part of it has just been the transition, and I know we had a lot of people who had been in the system for average 25 years who retired all at the same time. So we do have a pretty new team in the business office department. So sometimes, those staff members always knew the processes they were taking on a yearly basis, and obviously them leaving before the end of the fiscal year, we had to figure things and change processes, looking at a different approach to how we cross-train team members and how we become proactive in gathering a lot of this information ahead of the audit.
Yeah, I think one of the things you're kind of alluding to is that this would be like every year in years past in working with, any district or Edinburgh clients. Usually when we see trip ups is with turnover and things like that in succession, and someone left, and so then things aren't found. And so just kind of always looking forward to keeping that in mind is something we've been seeing for years, that everywhere is like, that's what seems to trip people up, is when people leave an organization and there just isn't that kind of trail, or that, like, Trina was just kind of alluding to, cross training, things like that. Maybe documents aren't, kind of found. So that is the one thing that I would say always keep in mind, is like a look forward, like how do we make sure that we kind of weather that if we do have people moving, leaving, or switching roles, things like that.
Yeah, it sounds like a big job with a lot of moving parts. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much,
Yeah.
Michelle.
Well,
We'll look
thanks again
forward
for
to
having
seeing
me.
you
Thank you.
again.
To the budget discussion.
And we'll move on to our revised fiscal year 2022-2023 budget. And Dr. Mary Perry Reed, did you want to say anything about that? Or should we go right into it? This is just like a jumbo agenda item, so I'm just trying to navigate it.
I think I framed it a little bit, but clearly there's been a lot of work, a lot of hours, collaborative effort with leaders getting together. Teruro's leadership has been instrumental. We've had to navigate a bit of declining enrollment, advocacy at the state level, and I think a lot of uncertainty and ambiguity, and not wanting to be on a fiscal cliff with the coming to close of federal stimulus dollars. So there are a lot of ingredients that bring us to this space. So I'll just let Director Chapanduka give us a summary of the revised and preliminary budgets for each of these respective years.
Thank you, Dr. Mary-Perry. Again, as we initially discussed at the board workshop, so for fiscal year 23, we did see a shift. As you all know, enrollment drives a lot of the revenue resources coming into the district. And for fiscal year 23, initially when we did the original budget and brought it to the board, we're anticipating enrollment to be about 6,850 at the K-12. And then as we started to get information later on into September, October, and up to today, we did start to see some shift in the number of students enrolling in our system, which kind of forced us to rethink in terms of how we optimize the available resources, as well as how we try to minimize the gap which we'll anticipate at the end of the fiscal year. So what we'll be presenting to the board here is the revised fiscal year 23 based on the new enrollment numbers we have and the different shifts and some of the structural changes we've made so that we don't end up having impacts to programs or having impacts to staffing, knowing that 80 to 82% of our expenditures are people, and looking at the projections and the actual numbers, and a lot of this information we end up knowing about it way into the year without wanting to impact the level of service and the staff. We had to find soft spots where we could minimize and lessen the exposure on expenditures, whether it's our supplies, whether it's relooking at our transportation routes, whether it's reducing contracts and contracted services. So the revised numbers are not factoring in the ESSA allocations. We'll talk about that in the next slide. So our revised general fund for fiscal year 23 will be sitting at $110,522,538. Our general fund expenditures, $111,790,399, leaving us with a deficit of $1,267,861. I know we did the best we could to do an estimation. We are still working on identifying any other cost-saving measures we can until we get to the end of the fiscal year. But this is what we have from a revised perspective. We also did take advantage of the one-time ESSA dollars, and we try to leverage those dollars since the dollars use it or lose it. So that being said, we did separately plan for the ESSA dollars with ESSA 2 and other one-time resources we've gotten from the state to the tune of general fund revenue of $2,805,474, and general fund expenditures of $2,805,474. These are ESSA or federal dollars which are expiring this year. We still do have some resources going into fiscal year 23-24, since it will be the last year for those resources to be allocated to school districts. So that is what I have for the general fund. Going into food service, again, there are other extenuating factors at play, considering that in the last 3 years, food service has been funded through the summer food service program, and fiscal year 23 is the first year since the pandemic where we are reverting back to the paid, reduced or free lunches. And after we had made our initial plan, there are certain components which we'll definitely talk about, which we couldn't factor in. We've had some challenges in terms of staffing in food services, so we had to eliminate some programs which had no direct impact to student services, and that actually ended up playing a part in a reduced revenue base for food services. So our revised food service revenue is $3,574,380 from about $4.1 million we had initially budgeted for. And our food service expenditures are $4,003,300, leaving us with a deficit for fiscal year 23 of about $428,920. Again, as presented by the auditors, our food service account does have a very healthy fund balance of $1,130,083 based on the audited financial statements. So the $428,920 will be absorbed into the fund balance. And then we do have a different plan for next year, which I will discuss as we go into fiscal year 24 budget. So some of the factors which have led to the food service fund realizing less revenue than what had been budgeted for is tied to some of the programs which initially had been the cash cow for food service around a la carte revenue. And again, due to shortage of staff, the nutrition service department had to prioritize services and focus more on service which has a direct impact to scholars. Again, knowing that this is the first year since the pandemic where we have gone back to the paid, reduced and free lunches, we've also seen a upward trend in negative balances, and we are trying to mitigate that by working with families. What we usually do is if we have a negative balance at the end of the fiscal year, we usually absorb that into our general fund. But that does have a negative impact to the food service budget. And the other component is around participation. As I had mentioned, when we realized that enrollment was going to be down, it does definitely have an impact on participation for scholars in the nutrition services programs. And there are other modifications to participation in some of the programs at the high school, which does definitely have an impact. We are anticipating that with the new universal free meal program, we'll probably start to see an upward trend in participation, which also increases the revenue to the nutrition services program. The next piece is around community education fund. Again, with the community education fund, we are anticipating, based on our revised budget, revenue of $9 million, $909,729. And originally it was about $9.3 million, so there's a bit of an upward increase. Expenditures are anticipated at $10,718,028, which leaves a deficit of about $808,299 in the Community Education Fund. And I would like to invite Director Fisher to come and give the board an explanation on the $808,299 deficit, which we are anticipating in the community education program. At the same time, the Community Education Fund does have a very solid fund balance, which will be able to absorb the deficit we are facing this year. Currently, as of the audited fiscal year 22 numbers, the Community Education Fund is a fund balance of $3,203,421. That said, I will give the floor to Director Fisher to give us some of the factors which have led to, the gap in the Community Services Fund budget.
Thank you, Director Chapin-Duca. Good evening, Chair Westmoreland and Hopkins School Board, Superintendent Mary Perry-Reed. The main reasons for our deficit this year in the Community Service Fund has to do with salary increases. We know in childcare turnover can be extremely high, and the quality of care is directly linked to the qualifications and the experience of staff. So for us, it was a good investment, but so we can continue to attract the best employees, but it does come at a cost. Additionally, sub-costs this year have been extremely high in preschool, as they have throughout the district. So that contributes to the budget deficit as well. Preschool meal costs have increased. It's important that we continue to provide healthy, nutritious meals for preschoolers, and that comes at a cost as well. Our preschool screening budget has had a shortfall this year. We are committed to providing high-quality screening services so that we can identify potential developmental delays and ensure that students receive the appropriate interventions. Unfortunately, the reimbursement costs from the state do not cover the deficit for our expenses in that program currently. Our interpreter costs are up. We have a wonderful, diverse linguistic community, and those interpreters are essential and they cost money. And as I mentioned in our workshop, the community education levy has remained the same since 2005. In the current education omnibus bill, there is language in there that would increase the community education levy, but not until the year 2025. So we're kind of waiting patiently or impatiently, I guess, for that increase to come. Thank you.
So that's what we have for fiscal year 23 budget. We'll take any questions before we move to fiscal year 24 preliminary allocations.
Thank you very much. Questions from my board colleagues?
Chair Westmoreland.
Director Adams.
Alex, we had a pretty significant deficit in the community ed budget last year, or we're experiencing it this year. Are you considering, we talked about this in the workshop, but are you considering raising fees for any of the programs to overcome that deficit? You know, I think staff is really entitled to the raises that they got this year.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the ways we will look to shore up that budget is by increasing fees. For example, Kids and Company will have an increase of 17% in the tuition fees next year. However, I want to point out that we have a long-standing and very strong relationship with Resource West. We're very grateful for that partnership. And we have, in collaboration with them, been able to establish a child care fund in excess of $100,000. So we will be able to offer child care for everyone that needs it, because we do have this child care assistance fund.
Okay. When do you anticipate those increases will go into effect?
Yeah, a good question. We are planning for them to go in effect in the fall of 2023.
Okay. And have parents been notified of this yet?
Yes, they have received communication about this.
Okay, all right. I'll just remind everybody that Springfest for Resource West is coming up in a couple of weeks, and that would help alleviate some of these problems, some of the shortfall for childcare for needy people in our district. So, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions?
I just have one question to piggyback on what Treasurer Adams had highlighted, more so for Kids and Company. Are you seeing any uptick in interest with, are you seeing any interest, uptick in interest from people who are seeing the advertisement and being able to meet those particular needs to be able to open it up? I don't want to put that out too much for the community, but a potential to increase headcount.
Yes. So you, just to clarify, are you asking if we've seen an increased demand for childcare among parents, or are you asking about staffing?
Staff.
Thank you for the clarification. We have seen more people express interest ever since we increased the wages. So we've become more competitive with the marketplace. We are now able to compete with, and the Amazons and the gas stations and things like that. However, our position has, in my estimation, much more meaning attached because you're making the difference in the life of a child and their family. And starting wages will be closer to $17.50 to around $21. Don't quote me on this, but this is the ballpark. So we feel better about that, and because of that, we have seen more interest, and we'll continue to recruit and leave no stone unturned as far as finding more employees for Kids and Company.
Thank you, Director Fisher.
Other questions?
Chair Westmoreland.
Vice Chair Andreessen.
I just had a quick follow-up on that because I don't want anyone to hear increased fees in community ed and get alarmed, because we provide a lot more than just Kids & Co. Through the community ed department. So if you could clarify, is that an increase in fees specific to Kids & Co., which is our before and after school piece of community ed, or are we looking across the board? Like, I'm thinking of our seniors who live on a fixed income. That might be a little difficult.
Thank you for the question. At this point, we're not looking at increasing any of our program fees that affect seniors, but what we are doing are trying to increase the quantity of classes and programs that we provide. So, we're hoping to have some, with the addition of the Meadowbrook East building or the Boy Scout building, we hope that'll create some additional space, which would allow us to create more programming. So we could potentially bring in more revenue through more classes that interest our community. But those fees won't be rising. Through some of our extended day preschool, there might be slight increases there, but we're still working on those numbers, so I don't have those at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And I did just want to quickly point out, we're spending a lot of time talking about this, but your revenue was higher than we budgeted for. So you're already doing really great work and bringing in lots of revenue for the district, but also we're translating that into doing the right thing by paying our excellent staff what they're worth. So thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Absolutely.
I'd like to piggyback off of what Vice Chair Andreessen said, that a lot of hard work has been done to increase revenue. A lot of hard work has been done by staff, administration, and even the board in the past to right-size budget to contribute to these balances that make a really difficult year like we've had weatherable. And so I think that that is commendable, and you're seeing the fruits of some of those painful decisions that had to be made several years ago now where we can look back on this kind of zany year relatively calmly, knowing that some adjustments have been made internally and at the legislative level. I did have a question with relation to nutrition. Is the plan, do you know, to bring back that a la carte line? You mentioned it being something of a revenue driver within the program, and we're doing this pivot to universal free lunch. The loss of that alone seemed to account for nearly the entire deficit this past year.
Sure. Thank you, Director Antland. Yes, the plan is to bring back the a la carte, and we've also included that in the budget. And there was also some transition in leadership in nutrition services. So with the new director coming in, she wanted to make sure that she has the foundational work done in terms of making sure that we are providing the direct services needed in our buildings before we think of any additional resources coming in. So now she has a plan in place, and she's looking forward to having all these other programs back and with additional staff too.
Okay, may I ask one quick follow-up
Yeah,
question
sure.
then too? What is do you know offhand what the family or the student negative balance is for the district? 'Cause you mentioned that as a
Sure. The
cause.
last time I checked, I think it was about $16,000 for this year. It does about $16,000 for this year. It does fluctuate. And I know in the past we've applied different models in trying to mitigate for that. One, we've had some resources provided through community partners at the end of the fiscal year. And this past year, we just add those dollars within the general fund. But on average, it's about $18,000 to $16,000.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Westmoreland.
Yes.
I thought of two more questions.
Sure.
One for each of you. Truro, what's this off-campus lunch option that you say was added this year?
Sure. And maybe Dr. Mary Perrit can help me answering that question around the off-campus lunch program.
We also have Principal Ballard here who might have, clearly has access to more detail than I do. However, we are supporting our high school leadership team as they explore opportunities for juniors and seniors, I believe, but older seniors. This is why you have to come up here. Seniors, so older students who have met very specific eligibility requirements to be able to have opportunities to purchase a lunch off campus. And so there have been a number of meetings that have taken place to figure out how might we operationalize this. And of course, this request came from students. Students would like the opportunity to earn their way toward being able to eat off-site as long as they are engaging in safe, driving and other behaviors, and also as long as they've met certain attendance and academic requirements. What more might you add, Principal Ballard?
Good evening, everyone. I would like to add that this has been a request for the last 3 years from our scholars. So we had a group of scholars that met to come up with a proposal so that they can have off-campus lunch for the senior class only. So what happens during the lunch block is our scholars are able to leave the building and visit the various restaurants that are in our neighborhood, and they come back. So I assume that there may be a decline in revenue as those scholars are no longer eating in our cafeteria, but they are eating at the restaurants in our community. Our scholars have asked for this again for many years, and one of the things that we're thinking about as it relates to the 9th grade transition of the amount of space that we have in our cafeteria, so creating an opportunity for our seniors to actually leave campus for lunch creates more flexibility with that space as we welcome our 9th graders. We probably have less than 200 that are leaving each day. It's a small percentage, but our scholars are very happy that they have an opportunity to have some options off campus.
I remember having a conversation with some students a few years ago, and I said, please tell me you're not eating roller dogs down at the holiday station, you know? And they said, no, it's Chick-fil-A. We got to have Chick-fil-A. So I'm assuming that that's where the bulk of them are going. But, thank you. The other question I had was.
Thank you.
Yeah. For Director Fisher. Do we, at the beginning of the school year, we had a big backlog of people that wanted to get their students into Kids and Company. Has that gone away, or does that still exist? Where are we at with the backlog?
It's been reduced considerably for the 22-23 school year. Everyone who we've contacted about openings have either accepted or said that they found alternative care. There are still people on the list that we've reached out to that haven't responded, or that they have, they're still on there, but we've made attempts to reach out to them and they haven't really responded there. So for this year, we are in great shape. And for next year, we're taking measures to recruit more people than ever before. So it's our hope that we will be very close to eliminating the wait lists in Kids and Company for the start of the 23-24 school year. I can't see into the future, but that's really what we're going to try to do.
All right, good, thank you.
Other questions about the 22-23 before we move on to fiscal year 24? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Director Fisher.
So moving along with fiscal year 24, since September, October, we've been meeting on a weekly basis with district leadership, building leadership, to come up with a framework for fiscal year 24. Some of the discussions led us to coming up with some priorities and objectives, which we factored in terms of how we're going to allocate resources for fiscal year 24. As initially discussed at the board workshop, one of the top priorities was the transitioning 69th graders to middle school and high school beginning in fiscal year 24. So that was one of the priorities and objectives for the fiscal year 24 budget. The other components were around growing Chinese, Spanish, outdoor immersion, project-based learning, multi-age classroom and virtual EDU, investing in early childhood and preschool learning, as well as K-5 enrichment and school-wide talent development. More focus on instructional quality and academic rigor, including latest science of reading training for K2 teachers, reimagining K-12 math, school-wide talent development and enrichment for K-6, and increasing rigorous course and career pathway enrollment for 9th to 12th graders. Strengthening career technical education pathways at Hopkins High School, restorative practices and wellness programs, as well as enhanced predictable staffing model to optimally allocate resources across all programs in all our buildings. So those are some of the priorities which were put at the tables, and we started to dig deeper into how we can operationalize this. For any details in terms of the programs, I will revert back to Dr. Mary Pirid or Director Eto. But from a resource allocations, those are some of the priorities we came up with when we're starting to frame the fiscal year 24 budget. As we've already mentioned earlier on, that our planning starts with enrollment. And again, fiscal year 23, based on what we've presented to the board, being a unique year where we started to see some shift in terms of some declining enrollment with a bigger percentage than we'd seen in the past, tied more to mobility, both in-state and out of state and out of the country. We started to look differently at how we are projecting our enrollment going into fiscal year 24 and beyond. Also factoring into perspective that we didn't get all the details from the state around any basic inflationary increases. So as a initial iteration of planning as well as allocating resources, we did use some conservative approach with the assistance from the Citizen Financial Advisory Committee. We came up with some preliminary allocation components which we factored into the budget being presented today. Again, as more information becomes available, we'll bring that to the board. But our allocation started with the base allocation, which is the predictable staffing model. We didn't really change our ratios if we compare to what we used for fiscal year 22-23, but we did get some input from building leaders on, different ranges they would consider to be more comfortable. We did cost those and came back to leadership and presented what that would look like if we either reduce the number of students to adult to student ratios, or if we reduce the ranges of how many students can be supported by a support staff, and what would that look like in terms of any flexible discretionary dollars coming into a building. And not knowing where we are with the inflationary increases from the state, we just went with a flat 0% state revenue increase as an initial iteration, knowing that any other revenue coming into the district will be factored in at a later day and brought back to the board. Based on the advice from the CFAC group, we factored in a 3% cost of living adjustment, a 3% fringe benefits increase, a 7% purchase services, supplies, utilities and energy inflationary increases. We also did make some changes to how we calculate resources allocated to buildings for categorical funding, achievement and integration, title, and ADSIS. So all those were factored in coming up with the allocations. We did not factor in the SR3 funds at this point in time. We'll definitely come back to the board once we have determined any remaining dollars going into next year. We also put into consideration our unassigned fund balance, which is based on what was reported by the auditors, still seated around about 10% from fiscal year 22. So those are some of the preliminary allocation components we put into consideration, knowing that there's also a lot of factors at play which we don't have knowledge around in terms of some of the bargaining, negotiation discussions going on with our different bargaining groups. We used a conservative 3% of cost of living adjustment, but if you look at the history on negotiations, sometimes it may go beyond the 3%, and then that's something we'll have to factor in any additional resources coming into the district to cover for that. So on the revenue, the general fund revenue, based on the assumptions at play, we have a total revenue of $116,880,277, and this is based on a 0% increase. And that comprises of about $17.6 million or 15.1% for operating referendum, which is voter approved. 4.7% or $5.4 million location equity, which is board approved. 11% or $12.9 million, which is the capital projects levy. 1.2% or $1.4 million, which is the achievement in integration aid. 4.4% or $5.1 million, which is compensatory revenue. 0.3% or $392,000 is English learners proficiency. 9.4% or $10.9 million is special education state aid. 2.6% or $3 million is federal grants. 0.4% or $409,000 is extended time. And 51% or $59.4 million is non-categorical revenue, for a total of $116,880,277. Of that, on the expenditure side, 56% or $65.4 million will cover salaries and wages. 24% or $27.4 million will cover benefits. 14.8% or $17.3 million will be purchase services, which include things like contracted services. For example, our bus contract is all covered under those dollars. Any third-party contracted services provided to the district, those are all covered under purchase services. 2.87% or $3.3 million supplies. 1.5% or $1.7 million is capital expenditures. 1.3% or $1.5 million is other expenditures, for a total of $116,880,277. We went further and actually broke down the total allocations by resources being allocated directly into buildings, and those being allocated to district-wide programs, as well as department allocations. Of the total allocations, about 57% or $67,118,835 is direct school allocations. 37%, $43,648,757 is district-wide allocations, and district-wide allocations include transportation. We budget our transportation at district-wide, but going into buildings, our operations and maintenance, including our custodians, our utilities, all fall under district-wide allocation. Part of the special education allocations fall under district-wide allocations. A lot of our risk mitigations around our insurance, some of our other post-employment components fall under district-wide allocations. And then the rest, about 5% or $6.1 million is the department allocations, which support buildings. For example, the business office, our payroll, accounts payable, our accounts receivable, grant management, they fall under the department allocations. Human resources, the retention and recruitment of staff, government and management, the superintendent's office, the board of education, they all fall under the department allocations. So 57% goes direct to school allocations, 37% destroyed allocations, and 5% to department allocations. So 95% is directly related to services happening in the buildings. The next fund is the food service fund. Based on some of the conversations which have been going on around moving from the National School Lunch Program to the Summer Food Service Program. So our budget is based on anticipating the Universal Free Meals Program coming into play in fiscal year 24. Currently, based on some of the historical information we've pulled, we have total revenue for food services at $3,961,042, and expenditures at $3,890,878, which leaves a surplus of $70,164. Again, this is also factored in some of the programs which were not operationalized in fiscal year 23, and we are hoping that there will be increased participation with the investor meals, which will also increase our revenue and resources. And for the Community Education Fund, we are budgeting a total revenue of $11,101,326 and total expenditures of $11,064,462 for a surplus of $36,863. Other consideration we've factored into fiscal year 24 budget centers around some of the economic ramifications, which we definitely are not certain about. One around any of the remaining ESSA funds, and once those become unavailable, that will also mean reduced services. And we are trying to be very cautious and intentional on how we try to minimize any impact, especially for those services which were funded by the one-time resources. Declining enrollment is a concern, and we are seeing this into the foreseeable future. Again, we are also trying to be very intentional, strategic in terms of how we are attracting enrollment into the district with programs like the virtual EDU, where we are putting some resources to at least identify unique opportunities which will attract students from outside of the district into the district. The other consideration, which is still not certain, is around legislative biennium, the budget settlements. We know we are getting something, but we don't know what that something is. So we are just using current assumptions, and hopefully we'll get more information sooner from the state so that we can plan those resources and allocate them appropriately. The other component is around inflation, and we'll keep monitoring inflation factors and making necessary adjustments if need be, with the hope that we'll bring more information to the board. With that, I will take any questions from the board. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Chapanduka. You used the words cautious and intentional, and I think that's exactly what you've presented to us tonight. You know, at the beginning, you were talking about the preliminary allocation components and saying that this budget is based on a 0% state revenue increase. I think we're all like really hopeful that we're going to get more than that, right, with the bills that are moving through. But just want to make sure that our community understands that we are budgeting from a really conservative place, so that when we get more money from the legislature, that these numbers will just increase and look so much better. So thank you for this, and wondering if my board colleagues have any questions or comments. So just procedurally for our community members watching, so tonight we will do a preliminary budget approval, and then Director Chapanduka will come back to us after we know more about what we're getting from the legislature, hopefully, to do that final approval, and that typically takes place in June. And is that kind of the timeline that we're thinking for this year as well, Director Chapanduka?
That's correct, Chair Westmoreland.
So any questions or comments here? Okay, so I'm trying to figure out my motion here. So I think because we don't need to do anything official with the audit report, I think I'm just going to move that the board approve the fiscal year 2022-2023 revised budget and the fiscal year 2023-2024 preliminary budget. So I've made the motion.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve both the revised budget and the preliminary budget. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you very much, Director Chapanduka. As I said at the workshop, you were the main event tonight, and you did not disappoint.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Truro.
Let's move on to our board member reports. Who'd like to go first?
Okay, I'll do it.
Yay.
Most of my time in the last couple of weeks has been consumed with legislative priorities. I went to the AMSD meeting in Little Canada 2 weeks ago, almost 2 weeks ago, and followed by an LAC meeting that day where we strategized about how to let our legislators know what we wanted in bills and what we didn't want in bills. As you're probably aware, they've created the omnibus education bills, both finance and policy, and in the House and the Senate. And there's some stuff in there that I'm not real happy about, but you just hope that your legislators listen to you and make the changes. If not now, maybe next session. But following that meeting, those two meetings on Friday the 14th, I had a meeting with Nick and Catherine Callahan on the 18th to talk about impact on the district and concerns that we've got, especially regarding unemployment compensation for hourly employees during the summer. That's something that is not funded by the state right now. It's in some bills, not in education, but in jobs and training, or DEED. And it's something that we are concerned about, that we might have to pay people to do nothing during the summer because we don't have any work for them, but it's going to be required by the state that we do. So if we're going to be required to do that, we'd like to get some funding for that. So we've had those conversations with our legislators and sent some letters. And another thing that's concerning to me is that there are bills, I think it's the House Omnibus Bill would require us to negotiate class sizes as part of our union contracts with our teachers. And who knows how long it's going to take to negotiate a contract if we have to go room by room in the district and determine what the class size limitation is going to be. It's going to be extremely difficult for school districts across the state to negotiate their teacher contracts, and it's just going to prolong the whole negotiation session. So anyway, it's something that I'm concerned about, and just about every board member in the state right now is concerned about. So we continue to lean on our legislators to try and get that out of the omnibus bill, but I don't know how successful we'll be. So you might be prepared for that. And then, and then again on Friday, we met, LAC met. I would just like to recognize the fact that this is After School Professionals Week, and give a shout out to all of our Kids and Company professionals in the district. My kids made great use of Kids and Company during their tenure within the school district, and they were wonderful people. A number of them went on to become teachers in the district, and I think it's a great learning experience and great training experience for future teachers. And it's a great experience for our kids. And I really want to give my full recognition to those professionals in Kids and Company for the work they do in the district. That's my report.
Thank you, Director Adams. Any other reports tonight? Going once. With that, I would look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adjourn. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. This meeting of the Hopkins School Board is adjourned at 8:53 PM. Thank you.
Thank you.